it also sort of in one way explains why incremental change is easier than paradigm shifts or fundamental change, because then I argue if you can keep your world model and add facets to it, that is one type of change. And when you get to a point where actually what I've been taught and everything I know about how to organize enterprise, which is based on Michael Porter, and I'm just making, and this is not valid anymore because that was written in the 70s when we had a much more slow-moving economy. Then you get into a point where actually the world model of how to build enterprise or how to change or how to behave, this is much more drastic. You're going into the patterns and DNAs of the companies and changing them. So, and I argue then, if I follow up on you, that, well, this is changing the world model, in the context of how to operate the company. And I think that's also what we see. So people are resisting change when it's completely outside of the world model, but when we can fit it into our normal model quite easily, it's easier. So change is hard, yes, but some change is extremely hard versus other change is quite much easier.
I read somewhere, and now I wish I would have remembered where this was, but that intelligent people have a harder time to shift their perception of things. Like if you have the idea about a certain thing function in a certain way, or the whatever, and if somebody comes then and tell you like, no, you're wrong, that's not how it works, then level of intelligence can sometimes be in the way of actually shifting your idea about, oh, I was wrong about that.
Ooh, that's an interesting statement.
I don't know that, but it's interesting.
I've heard, other ways to describe that thing. So, I'm not a psychologist in any way, but I remember one rhetorical kind of lecture I had once, and they spoke about, if you want to change the mind of someone, you can tell if they are a small sibling, a larger sibling, or the middle sibling.
Yeah, that's another one.
And that really changed the way you should approach trying to convince someone. So if someone is a large sibling and they have smaller siblings, if you go to tell them, you're wrong, this is the way it is, they will be really, really offensive and defensive in the rest of the discussion. It doesn't work. However, if they are a smaller sibling and they have elderly siblings, that's a really good way to do it.
Because it's my bigger brother telling me how it is.
And they're used to that, so they conform to it. But it's hard to tell, is it a connection or causation or correlation to intelligence, or is it a sibling type of thing, or is it a psychological trait, to the openness and agreeableness kind of traits that we otherwise have?
But I can extrapolate. Maybe it has nothing to do, if I remove the word intelligence and put in the word thinker. So someone who has thought hard about something and tried to build up a world model and spent a lot of his effort in trying to sort things out, and it actually works for him, then I could understand how that person would find it very much harder to discard that versus someone who is sort of, I haven't thought about it. Oh yeah. Do you mean I was doing that before? I never thought about that, and now I should do that. Okay. So I think it's also about the thinking man who has overthought his world model has a hard time letting go of his perfect idea of how it should work. Whereas if you're a non-reflective person, or if you take every day as a new day, I think you have a different mindset altogether for change.
But isn't that when you talk about the incremental change versus the very when you just shift things completely? Isn't that part of what they call nudging, when you just take things one small step at a time?
Incremental change is one thing, and large change is another one. And then we're getting into tactics, and then basically, if the big change is almost impossible for anyone to do, then ultimately, nudging is the way forward. So it's a way to. I mean, like I can't convince you that your world model is bad from day A from Monday to Tuesday. So I need to nudge you. I need to feed you until I get cracks in your armor until your armor starts falling apart, until you're naked, and now you are ready to go. So nudging for me is even the point of unlearning the old model or the old view. You need to unlearn in order to relearn something new. And for me, nudging is part of that game of unlearning.
Similar to perhaps boiling the frog kind of thing. If you have you heard? Okay.
I've heard it, but what does that mean?
I mean, it's the very nasty story of if you actually put a frog. If you put a frog in a pan of water and you start to boil it, if you do that very slowly, they will simply stay in the
because it just get cozier.
Yeah, and it's warm and nice, and at a certain point, it starts boiling, and they're still in the pan, and they die. But if you throw a frog into a boiling pan of water, they will jump out directly. Yeah. But if you do it slowly enough, nudging slowly, you can move people and views in perhaps surprisingly efficient way.
That turned really harsh, really fast.
But I want to share, at summertime sometimes, when you're at the beach or at the pool, you try to figure out what useful books can I read. And I had one book this year, Atomic Habits. Could you check out who wrote Atomic Habits, Goran? Have you heard about the book Atomic Habits? Have you read it? Because Atomic Habits to me is the latest book I've read that I think in the best way to me go deeper in basics on understanding how you make change happen. And the core story is a couple of core concepts. One of the key concepts is compounding effects. And basically there is no transformative change that, it looks like transformative change, but actually it's compounding effects of doing many things right. Microscopic things many ways. So if and there are examples of how they made the UK cycling team going from being very average to super good. And what do? They started to tweak and improve on every little small thing they could find. So this is one core dimension of Atomic Habits, compounding effects when we talk about change and how you get it. The other major story is that change is extremely hard if you don't set up the right context or the right environment. So basically, the simple thing is like if you really truly want to change from being a smoker to a non-smoker or being maybe fat to a very sporty guy, it starts with changing your identity. With your identity, it means you're not going to have fat food at home, or you're not going to have cigarettes at home. So you set up an environment, you set up a context where it becomes more easy to do what the change wants you to do rather than do the normal thing. And I think all these things are so problematic that they're so easy to. We don't understand compounding effects, and we don't understand how to set up an environment where it nudges us to do the right thing in relation to change rather than going back to our old habits.
But what I really liked about Atomic Habits and the way he set up how to go about with change is when he stated the fact that you should you should see who you want to be. Do I want to be a person who does these things, or do I want to be a person who is perceived as this? It
starts with identity.
Yeah, exactly. And coming from when we start talking about, organizational change, and are we prone to change? Are we not prone to change? And I think that's such a key thing. Like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Why is there a need to go from this phase to another phase? And I think that's one of the other things that's so often missed when you do big transitions.
And I think that learning from Atomic Habit is profound. And let's put that now in an AI and data context. So if you have been an analog company for your whole life, I talk about companies that are 100 years old and they really grew up in a different era. And of course they have been computerized, and they see themselves, their identity is that we are using data. We are users of data. We are consumers of data. And now maybe in order to be completely data-driven and really embed and get data at scale, then they need to understand themselves not from being, the identity shift from being users of data or consumers of data to data driven, or like so data and analytics and algorithms becomes an integral part of how they do their business. It's not some AI sugarcoating on top of their analog DNA. It's really identifying themselves as this. So I've been joking, and I said in Vattenfall when I was there, do you guys realize we are an asset company and we need to become 50% a software algorithm company? So this is the identity part. So I think this is profound, that we try now to do digitalization change, but we haven't really touched the core DNA or identity of the company.
Yeah, but I see that a lot when I'm out talking to big companies and organizations, and of course some companies are very far in this sort of journey. I hate that word, but still, in a transition from one phase to another. And IT, or the technical part, has been a tool for something for such a long time. It has been something that you have to have, but it's tucked away down in the basement somewhere. Just cost money that you don't really know what they're doing. And nowadays, it's at the center. It's at the core. It's probably what drives value to your company in one way or another. And that means that we also have to shift how we perceive or how we see the people actually doing the work regarding tech. And I think even though people today, they say that it's important, and they, put fancy tech conferences or whatever, but they don't really understand what it means. And they don't see the actual value of being technical driven.
And one argument could be, if we follow the path, have you truly changed identity? No, we are consumers of tech that someone else is doing for us. We are not a tech company. We need to infuse tech thinking in our core DNA. That's an identity shift right there. And if we follow atomic habits, that's the first step in any fundamental change to succeed, then here is one part, maybe a big piece of the puzzle that we haven't been able to communicate or really take that in.
And isn't that something that's quite easily, and I'm asking you now because you're the expert here, isn't that what's sort of one of the puzzle pieces to actually get AI into proper, where it could be, where it's, doing the most worth?
You can start. I have my view on that.
Oh, sorry, I was writing. Could you repeat the question, please?
No, but it's how, is the key topic of making to start identifying yourself as a tech company is step one to succeed with data AI at scale. And if I take the answer, I think that's the core. That's my core message. And I give you a very concrete example. I have worked with tech and IT now, stumble into this era from a business perspective in 2011, going way deeper, earlier, but really in my last formal roles, where we've been building in different facets tech teams inside the business. So basically working very closely with the central IT teams, but really embedding data and analytics in the normal business teams. And I think that because if your identity is that you are a tech company and that's part of your core DNA and core business, then you can't really organize all the tech resources as support resources. You have maybe platform infrastructure resources, but of course you have your data scientists right in the middle of the business team.
Yeah, because they need to know what it is that's,
exactly.
the problems or whatever.
So it's very, very simple. And if you simply shift your identity from a user consumer to an identity of I'm driving my core business with it, that will have a huge consequence how you would organize and steer it.
And how you would innovate, of course. Yeah. How to bring stuff even better.
Yeah. So I follow what your argument, and I'm exactly on that same trajectory, that if you really want to do data AI at scale, you need to understand your identity in a different way, and therefore you need to start organizing these specialists in a different way.
Should we add that as a topic? I think that's an interesting thing, how to really make a change in a company.
Yeah, very good.
And really try to find the best value of data and potentially AI in some way, and then think about different ways to approach that. I actually add that to the list here.
Yeah, but first, let's do a very proper introduction of Louise Vanerell.
Vanerell, yes.
Vanerell.
Lots of words.
Vanerell. So working at Upskill, working a lot with helping businesses and organizations upskill, reskill, find the right talent that is required in order to be part of the the new normal, whatever that is.
Whatever that is.
Yeah.
We can get into that later.
Yeah, but let's start with a short introduction, a little bit like now you're head of operations in Upskill, but how did you get there? What's your background? What was your key moments that sort of took you where you are now?
Ooh, that's a tricky question. Well, I have a quite diverse background. It's not been a straight line coming from having a plan set to ending up where I am today. But I ended up with Upskill when we started 2.5 years ago, and I've set up our whole operations basically. It's a lot of fun. We can go into detail later. But my background, apart from that, is I've been working as a project manager, mostly for my professional life. And I've been doing it in very, very diverse settings. So everything from the music business, and I've been working in finance and cultural aspects
music
overall.
Business, which type of company was that?
I started off at, back then, Sony BMG, which is now Sony Music. And then I went on and I worked for a big concert promoter called AIAW. And then I worked for the Stockholm Jazz Festival for quite some time, did their press and stuff.
It's just surprising, how many of our guests here at the AI, after our podcast that have some kind of musical background and interest and passion.
Yeah, I was an avid record collector during my school year, so I got to know sort of everyone who sold records.
And then vinyl. Or?
Yeah, both. But it was just... I was deep down into so many different aspects of very, very far-off musical styles.
What's your musical interest today?
Oh, it's still very vital. I keep looking for new good things. That's on a constant. So definitely still up there.
And do you have any hunting spots? Where do you find it? Even in digital, is Spotify a good place, or do you?
Yeah, it is, and I think the algorithms they have is very good. But I think when you've had such a deep knowledge or interest, knowledge is it's somewhat semi when it comes to music, but interest at least, you have a good way of just like finding when you find something that you like, a sound or it's easy for me to sort of follow the tracks to find other things that's related, either by labels or by producers or band members or whatever.
You started. That was going to be my question. What if you some hunter tricks here? If you find good music, or you find, how do you find related music? You said it.
Yeah, well, producers is always a good thing, but I also think that at least it used to be that labels were really good, especially when you find the sort of smaller labels that just don't do everything. But I never been I like small label music. That's usually because then you know that there's going to be somebody with a big heart in a certain sort of musical style or aspect that's obviously have found different stuff, and the likeliness that you're going to find something else that you like is going to be quite big.
That's a good idea.
If we speak about change, I actually changed my taste in music a number of times.
Oh, really?
What would it take to change your taste in music?
Oh, I have such a broad taste in music. Of course, if you would probably put my music into some sort of AI black box, you could find some traits, and I think part of that trait would be that it's somewhat dirty. I don't like too polished music, but then it can be, it could be the dirtiest Americana you can possibly find, or it can be really, really way out there. Jazz music, maybe not, but at least some sort of electronic when it comes to those sort of things. But
Would it be possible for me to persuade you to like a genre that you hate today?
Could be hard.
Do you hate a specific genre today?
I wouldn't say that I hate.
What do you dislike the most?
Well, it always sounds so elitist, but I mean the very, very well-produced radio that just sort of instantly grabs your mind. I can hear the production value. I see why somebody has made it and the way that it is, because it's instantly catchy and everybody's gonna like it, or they're gonna feel hot, or whatever. But it just doesn't stick with me, and that's why when I say dirty, there needs to be some dissonance to it, because I need to find that to keep being interesting. I know, there's songs that I've listened to for 15 years, and whenever I hear them, I get as instantly caught up in like, wow, what kind of crazy person did this? That's what I'm looking for.
You know, I like dance band music. I didn't do that for like 10 plus years ago, but someone forced me to take dance lessons, and it was not my choice. I was forced into it, and I was forced to listen to the music. But after having, you know, by torture kind of listened to the music for years, you start to really appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's an acquired taste, so to speak. Is that what change means? Do you need to do that? Or what would be necessary to change you to like dance band, for example?
Yeah, but I think dance band has some aspects to it, and I think I was quite some time ago. I went into this very polished American country music, which is not too far off from dance band. And there's just these songs about heartbreaks, and and every song on every album is always about heartbreaks, and you're like, who are you? So I wouldn't say that it's too far off, but then of course you add in like identity and who am I and what kind of music do I like. But yeah, give it a go. I'm more than up for it.
Okay, so with sufficient persistence, we can make you change your taste in music. Then.
I can add on. I don't think it's going to change, but I can add things to it. When I maybe 10, 15 years ago, I hadn't been that much into electronic music at all. And then I was introduced to this, like, the very, very hardcore, and so to speak, Detroit techno. And it just blew my mind. I was like, this is a complete new field of stuff that I haven't dived into.
So it's more like, it's not so much the changing, but it's like opening up to a new
adding on
era, and then you add it on, and then almost you forget about that. For now, you're completely into this, and then it changes. Yeah, I like that. But you studied history.
Yeah.
How is there a link from history, or something you can take out of that sort of study? So that what you were going in that direction. Do you feel like you completely changed direction or left that be, or is it something that you have with you?
No, I definitely have that with me, and I would say that the thing that's the red line in everything that I do is that I love reading. So I read all the time. I'm always carrying a book of some sort, and I think I actually went into history studies because I when I looked at everything, and of course going into studies, there's always going to be lots to read, but I was looking at the things that I was interested in, and I'm an interested person. I like to learn stuff, and I'm curious. But history sort of gave me all the books. And I would say that if usually when I tell people, like, my academic background is in history, and people like, why? And what do you use that for today? But the one thing that I actually use it for, that I'm really, really good at, just digesting loads of information. And not just only digesting, but also sorting out what I actually need to know and what I need to pick out.
Do you have some special study technique that you make use of, or do you just read?
I was thinking about this the other day, and I remember when I had these study intense periods of time, I do a lot of patience, with cards. So I read a bunch of stuff, and I just read it, and then I completely switch my focus on something.
Switch focus.
And then I go back, and then I either write something, or I try to pick out what was actually interesting. So playing cards.
Are you still doing it?
At times, yeah. Nowadays, there isn't, which is saddened, but there isn't that maybe the particular need to go that deep into something. Part of my essay that I did in history was to read through like 20 years of debates from Riksdagen between like 1902 and 1918.
Wow.
That took a lot of time. Yeah.
Why? Or
Well, I did. Part of my studies was actually going through the debate, the political debate that was regarding conscience objectors. It's a really hard word to say in English. When it came to military service, so I needed to find all the debates where they actually discussed this topic, and then I needed to sort of write them out and then do my analysis of them.
Should use some AI to cluster
Yeah,
those.
that would have been perfect.
Today when you get a task like that, you can solve it quite differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the thing, because what I like about history, and I was thinking about this in regards to data when it comes to AI, because of course data is at the core. You need to have some sort of input into what it is that you're going to be addressing. And when it comes to history, that's sort of a different area than from almost any other science, because science is on a regular term, then you have facts, and you look at, you just need to find that spot of information that's going to be, and you combine them and you do whatever you do. But in history, there are no certain facts, because everything that is some sort of document of stuff that happened before is always going to be altered in one way or another. Depending on if you wrote about what happened here today or if Goran does, it's going to be a slight difference. And then when you think about a lot of the historical documents we have were maybe written like 200 years after, or they were written, by the conqueror or whoever, there's always going to be an element of how do I use this data in order for it to be actually something usable. And that's one of the key things that I think that I use on an everyday basis, to be able to sort through information and what's useful in this context, and how do I need to behave regarding this kind of data in order to make it useful.
But I think the critical reader, the critical thinker, assessing the usefulness and the validity and reliability of a text, I think this becomes a really important trait. We talked about ChatGPT or something like this, can we trust it or not trust it? And I think in the conversation I had with Stefan Vendin, it's actually learn to be critical about the text and the source and like this. And by the way, this is not a new phenomenon, because whoever was in power has always rewritten the history in order to serve their agenda.
Yeah, exactly. It's
so
always
it's an old game, so to speak, that we need to be really good at.
You almost, sorry to say, it's almost sound like Kanye West. And I remember the discussion we had at their awards. So thanks for that, Louise.
Wow.
It was really fun. But but just to give a quick recap of that, I mean, that was an interesting, if we use that word, podcast with Kanye West and Lex Friedman. And he basically said a statement like, there is no value in history at all.
I disagree.
Yes, I think most people disagree. And it's kind of interesting. But he said basically that something similar, which is of course true, that every person that tells the story change it in some way, and there is some tweak, some kind of agenda, some type of bias that's being added to it as it's being told over and over again. And he claims that that's why all the history that's being taught in school is so biased towards whoever won whatever war or whatever, so it's completely useless. And that's a very, very strong statement, right? Or how would you reply to that?
Well, I would say firstly that he doesn't really put a lot of trust in the receiver of things. Yeah. Because, of course, everything that you're taught in one way or another is going to be through some sort of medium. And that medium can be a person, or it can be a book, or it can be, whatever. And if we're going to go deep down the rabbit hole, we can start talking about, perception overall. Like, what do you, in your function, when we're talking about brain activity, how do you see things and how do you perceive things? So you can stretch it really far about about what is a fact. But when it comes to historical data, I mean, how can you, well, it's just so, I won't say stupid because obviously it's not, but it's so narrow and it's so shallow to say that.
But I think it's an interesting lesson to learn. I mean, for one, of course, history as we know it and have read about it is biased.
Yeah, of course.
And I think every statement that you hear, especially if it comes from chatbot or ChatGPT or some other AI system, is biased. And then you have to assess the confidence level in some way, as you should always, right? So it doesn't mean it's useless. Even if I hear a statement from ChatGPT about something that I know it can't know anything about because it's only trained from data from 2021 and forward, but still it can produce statements sounding very, very confident about stuff that happened in last year or this year, which obviously has no basis at all, then we have to be able to assess some level of confidence in some way But it doesn't mean that all statements in the past is useless, right?
No.
That's an
And I mean,
extreme exaggeration.
Yeah,
when do you face information that is not biased or
Yes, exactly.
subjective in any way?
Because the problem with the statement from that podcast is when you're taking it to such an extreme, and then you realize that I'm not going to discard that, but it's not well thought through because everything is biased. I mean, like, and so
Only history, but
not only history, everything is biased because there's an agenda somewhere. So the real
and it doesn't have to be an agenda. Sorry to interrupt.
No.
It just your subjective view about how to interpret something.
Yes.
So it doesn't even have to be that you have I'm trying to manipulate you into doing certain things or believing certain things.
No, because we can have an argument and think we're talking about the same thing. But we're actually understanding it. We're having different perspectives of what we're hearing. So actually, when the two people in that conversation goes home and is going to explain what we talked about or how we see the world, they might differ.
I mean, we can go into linguistics and talking about the meaning of words.
Yeah. So now we're getting into semantics and semiotics and all this stuff that is really core. But I think so. The main point that I was trying to make is actually, we need to be good at evaluating, assessing, triangulating with different. So, okay, this source says this, interesting. Do I have other sources that says completely different? And where is the middle? So this sort of conscious
confidence level. You need to be able to assess the confidence level of whatever source of information you have.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think
and
that's why
with ChatGPT, that's the essence of getting real value out of that. Of course, is to understand it's no different.
No.
It's just that it brings to the forefront. We need to be good at this.
Yeah, and I think that's where if I can use my history study points for something, but having that sort of mindset about always evaluating whatever information you have in front of you. And I think in more technical or, the more proper sciences, then you're always looking for some sort of proof. And you need to be able to validate that the reasoning behind why you've come to this conclusion is right or not. Well, in history, that doesn't really exist. You can only come so close to something that might be perceived at least, somewhat like the truth.
But, this is funny. Just the other week, I was, studying homework, supporting my 14-year-old, and he had a history homework, and the homework was to learn how to use different begrepp, different terms in order to assess validity of the text. And historic text, and then so he had the time perspective, how far after it happened was it written, the source perspective, how influenced or how in the middle of this, was it an objective written text from outside or was it written by the actual winner of the war? So it's actually quite interesting. Like he's 14, and they are now studying begrepp, so you can assess how you go about assessing validity or confidence level in historic text. And I find that extremely useful just to think about, okay, what is this, what types of terms or ways of assessing modern text in ChatGPT should we now apply? And I think that's very, very useful.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm glad to hear that they do that in education.
Yeah, and I was quite interested because here's a history lesson. Are we gonna which årtal, which years am I gonna remember now? And then it's like, no, this is begreps for historic validity of text. Wow, 14, year 8. I think that was pretty cool.
Cool. At some point, you moved to Upskill Company. Can you talk a bit more about that journey?
Yeah. Well, I went from working in music business to start doing more proper project management work, and I went around the different production companies, and I went into finance for some time, and I went into the whole studio and commercial, and then eventually I started ending up in the more technical side of things. So working with developers and designers and doing proper products and services. And then I happenstance that happens sometimes. So this was in the, I think beginning of 2020. So we're talking just when the pandemic hit. And then I came in contact with a person, Gabriel, who had this idea about starting. And this was after the summer, I think, 2020. And so we started up the Upskill Company. And
you
of
were
course,
part of starting it up as well, or?
yeah,
Okay.
yes. And he had been working with similar things before, but he needed somebody who could do things, and I'm good at doing things, good at solving problems. So we started, just working out the concept, and of course talking to clients. And this was then, I think October 2020. So when we talked about change and how people react when they're facing something that's, the pandemic was something that we haven't really seen or needed to get our head around before. And in a lot of the big companies, they've thrown out all the consultants, and they were standing there. And then people realized about this time that, the world wasn't going to go under just yet. So this brought a lot of change and a lot of momentum, I think, into now we have the capacity and we have room to do stuff. And the core idea about what we do is, of course, the core idea is that the right person can learn just about anything, and we aim it towards getting more people into tech, because there's this huge skills gap, and people are always like, we need to find more people or find the right people. And so that is what we do.
It's actually, I'm sorry to quote from this source, but I'm going to do it anyway. What Kanye West also said is that...
Why are we going here? Oh my God.
Just give it up, man.
Sorry. No, but I think he said basically that the only thing you need to study is not history, but it's engineering. Actually, I can agree partly, but I don't agree that the only thing you need to study is engineering. So, of course, it's wrong. But it is valuable to learn tech and engineering, right?
Yes.
And that is also one of the...
It's interesting that he can be so devoted to Jesus, but he doesn't believe in history.
We should probably stop speaking about Kanye West.
Let's not go there. There was some fun. Friends of ours did an AI model to see what words we've been using the most.
And Kanye West was one of them.
I don't want to have Kanye West popping up in the top. So no more.
Still, going back to Upskill Company then, and you saw a need basically in society, I guess, in some way to be able to upskill people to learn more about tech. Is that correct?
Yeah, or not to learn more about tech, because what we do, this is sort of the his pitch, elevator pitch, sorry. But we always start at a certain, problem or a need from a company. And since we're working with competence, of course, that needs to be some sort of skills gap. And a lot of companies face this in different areas of their technical part of operations. And of course, you can always throw the numbers. I think usually people say that there's about 70,000 people missing in tech only in Sweden today.
Heard that number before.
Yeah, exactly. It's a valid one. But I was listening to somebody else these days, and he said, I think it was the CEO of Microsoft, and he was talking about numbers of like 200,000 over the coming years, because not only do we need to bring people into tech, we also need to change the skill set that people in tech already have. So there's a lot of competence missing that we can agree on. And when we find, because of course there's not going to be a magic pill that just solves everything. In that case, we would be rich, all of us, if there was such a thing. But we need to, I think you always need to address the proper problem at hand. So you need to find a certain area where you're missing a certain kind of skill set, and you need to focus on that one, or at least that's what we do. So we find talented people, and we don't look for merits, because those people can be found somewhere else. So we look for potential, people with the ability to learn, and the sort of tool set when it comes to other kind of competences to be able to shift into a certain kind of role.
I think we need to dig a bit deeper into what you just said, because I think it's very interesting. look for potential, not for merits.
Yeah.
And it connects very much to recruiting, and now people do interviews.
Exactly.
How do you find potential and not merits?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is that you need to sort of get your head around what sort of competences that are actually needed. And now it's easy to sort of go on to a different a stretch here. But if we're talking about solving problems and finding people who are able to be innovative and to come with different sort of perspectives and to just come up with new ideas, if we're doing it simple, to be creative. Then we, of course, need to bring in people who think in different ways than the people that you already have on board. And how are you going to do that? Well, obviously, you're not going to be able to find those who have done the same sort of career stretch that everybody else have. And when we say that we look for potential, yes, to make it easy, we need to find people who are smart and who are good at solving problems. So when we talked about the Big Five and adding that sort of competence profile
And perhaps
mapping,
we need to define what is the Big Five, just so people know.
the Big Five is a tool set or a method where you map out certain personal traits. It's not a personality test of any kind. It's to find competences, and you map them after 5 different, major parts, which is always sort of the opposite to each other. So you have a what do you call it?
I think it's an interesting history of how they came up with this. So I think it was in the 1950s or something, and they had a set of psychologists, and they usually have these kind of surveys that they fill out, like thousands of different questions, trying to do some kind of self-assessment in, how they grade themselves. And they were really trying to find a way to reduce those 1,000 dimensions of questions into some kind of uncorrelated set of dimensions. And they basically use like factor analysis or these kind of statistical approaches to simply see, given the results of these surveys, surveys that they have done, can we simply find a set of factors or dimensions or traits that are uncorrelated? And they came up with these 5. The ocean model or whatnot. What is it? The openness, it's the conscientiousness, extrovertedness.
You know this better than I do.
Agreeableness and neurosity, I believe. And I think for me, as a hobby psychologist, I've never taken a course in this, but I think it's super interesting to see how valuable I think these kind of traits are, and how actually statistics can be used for something so useful as well in statistics.
Exactly. And speaking about statistics, the sort of competence mapping that we do is two parts.
Yeah.
It's the Big Five that you just mentioned, and then there's the regular sort of logical problem solution test. Yeah, how smart are you? And that is actually one of the few, or if not the only, statistical way that you can measure how well somebody's going to perform in any kind of role.
That's a very interesting question. I must really... can we go deep on that a bit? Because I had a discussion about this very recently as well.
Shit.
Of course, I agree to a large extent that these kind of... if you call it more IQ tests, or if you call it these kind of tests where you test both, like logical reasoning, but perhaps also some factual, like... general knowledge tests, language skills, or whatnot. They are very useful to potentially see then how well will you be able to do whatever type of task. However, the question is then, how do these skills, how well you perform on this type of test, correlate to how well you be a contribution for a company? And I'm just going to say a number of other dimensions that I think is useful, and please disagree if you don't agree. So let's call this first dimension, what should we call it? Logical reasoning, or should we call it like language skills, or no, not language skills, but let's say
communication skills maybe.
Because I think, if you take just the logical reasoning, that's one part. If you just stick to that, and factual knowledge is so useless anyway. And I hate
it's
these
very
kind of,
easy to add on or
yeah,
remove or
and we
whatever.
just ask ChatGPT and it will give you the answer anyway. So even though some tests do include like factual tests, I think it's useless. Let's call it logical reasoning. I would argue that there are a number of other dimensions that I think is very complementary, potentially even more important. One is, of course, communication skills then. If you are able to formulate yourself in an efficient and clear way, you will have a success in your life more or less independent of the logical reasoning. It will be complementary, at least. You can have a super smart person from a logical reason point of view, but if he can't communicate, he will not perform well. The other part is potentially more psychology, like the big five, right? So if you are very bad in one of these traits, and bad meaning extreme, either high or low.
Depending on what you're supposed to do, yes, of course.
Yes, it depends a bit on that. But that's also, potentially bad or good thing. So then you have logical reasoning, you have or communication skills, you have some kind of personality trait. I would add at least one more, which is, I guess it's part of the personality trait, but it's more or less the drive that you have, the conscientiousness, the ability to actually make something happen, to drive it through to the end, so to speak.
Some sort of self-leadership, to use a word that's commonly used today.
Yeah. So that's why I reacted a bit when you said what you said. That I think just having that test by itself can be potentially misleading.
But then you also have to divide them, because if you're only looking at one thing, and what I said was that the logical problem-solving ability is the one thing that we can measure. That's gonna that's going to say something or show a probability of how well you're going to perform no matter what the work is. When you add on these different things, yes, of course, if you are smart or if you're good at solving problems, which is your more correct term for it, and you are good at communication, yes, of course, that's going to be better.
Yes.
But it's hard to measure communication skills. So if we're talking about data-driven stuff that we can, like put into, exactly. Yes. Then that's the only thing that we can actually look at. But of course, that's not the only thing we do, because
we can measure at least the conscientiousness is something you can measure, at least to some extent.
Really?
Some kind of self-test or self-assessment.
Yeah, but self-assessment is always a tricky. It's sort of a blunt object.
Yeah, sure. It's
because
hard, but it's not impossible.
No, exactly. But if you are going to do things on a big scale, and when there are certain nuances of things that's going to be able to shift your results, and I'm talking to AIAW people here. You should know about these things. Then you're on a slippery slope. But of course, like I said, when we do this when we look for potential and when we evaluate people on potential, we do have a match of these two. So it's not either or, but we put a higher degree
on
the
two being both the personality test and
the competence mapping, which is
you call it competence mapping. Okay.
Competence profile. Yeah. And we have selected certain traits from these big five that we see are more beneficial to succeeding in the kind of projects and the stuff that we set up. And one of them are, of course, communication skills. And the other one is I think the last one you mentioned about stress.
Oh, stress, neurosity.
Yeah, exactly. Because what we see as a big factor in this is when you are put in a tight spot, and it doesn't mean that you're being, chased by lions. It can just be that you're facing maybe a lot of different problems or whatever.
High workload or whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. And then, how do you react? Do you go full panic, or do you actually just focus and try to do one thing at a time? Right. Yeah, of course. That's going to be a super important trait in how well you perform in certain aspects. And
if I asked you, okay, sorry, yeah.
The third one that's actually one of the most important one is actually empathy. Like how well do you care about the bigger group?
Yes,
or the smaller
agreed.
group. And those three things we find are, highly, highly important when we're finding people who we then, put through a very short amount of time to get them to know the skills. And then we put them out, and they have to actually do things with these skills.
Empathy, love, potentially positive attitude as well, I would argue. Some people that are strong complainers is potentially a bit dangerous to get into an organization.
No,
right?
that's
But how does this work now? So give us an example now, because if I get it right, so you talk to a client and basically highlight we have a skills shortage, and we in a way we want to employ or recruit these people.
Yeah, of course.
And so in this sense, you are then helping them to, they're not there in the market, but we know how to find potentials, do a very specific training for them in order to place them in a working role with you within 6 months or 3 months or 2 months. Is that the core?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that one of the core business models?
Exactly. So to take an example, for instance, cloud technologies or cloud developers, big in demand out there. So if we come to a company and they say, hey, we need to either switch out, we're too heavy on the consultancy side, or we're going to go through a big transformation, so we need to fill, from the ground up. But we can't find these people, or everybody else is looking for them. So we find people with potential who we see are going to be a good fit. We do a very specific training program, so we build the training setup for this particular company.
To be close to their particular stack or context.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Instead of, this is the big difference from more regular education, because then you need to learn all the databases. We can only focus on the one that you're actually going to be using. So 12 weeks is a very short amount of time if you compare to going to the university for 3 years, 4 years. But when you take away everything that is not important or specifically needed, then 12 weeks is quite a long time. And you can fill it with a lot more than you can imagine. So afterwards, when they've been through the training, and then we place them out at the company, and then, they start working from, of course, a junior role or a junior.
Is it mainly junior people, or could you take senior people that want to change potentially their?
It's mostly, I don't know what you count as senior people, but we don't aim at actually young people. We try to find mostly career changers.
Oh, really?
So most of the people who come into our programs have, been working 6 or 7, 8 years within some different field of work. And I would say that that's sort of the crucial point here, where, it gets interesting for real. Because what they bring is, of course, a professional knowledge from something else. But they also bring perspective and different ways of thinking. And I can talk for hours about, all the different sort of characters that we've had through our programs. But we have everything from, people working in marketing and buying. We have loads of people coming from finance and banking and stuff. But I think we had 2 doctors in astrophysics. We'd had 2 lawyers. We had at least 1 psychologist. There's a broad spectra of knowledge that we bring in, who then learn a very specific technical field, and then they go out and work in their new role.
And do you ever work with a client and reskill internal employees that we want cloud from our IT department? We have too many of this kind. Can you help us reskill? Can you find the potentials who can make the shift to become now new cloud developers or whatever they need instead?
Yeah, we do that too. But I think the most interesting results come when you actually mix, when you bring in people from the outside who come with completely fresh perspectives. And then you add in people from internally. Of course, we work mainly with enterprise companies, so there's going to be loads of interesting good people that they want to keep, but they realize that either they are in a position that's not going to be needed in the future.
We're coming now into data and AI replacing or changing jobs that the way they've been done, we don't need them in the same way. But if we can have people and reskill them, of course, there's many other things that we know. We have too many here, but we have a shortage over here. That's what's happening right now, I think.
But then we're back to where we started, like the reason for change. Yeah. And I think one of the key things that we're looking for when we're bringing in internal people is like, do you want to do this? Or is this something that you feel is forced because you need to, somebody has told you need to change. Yeah. And then maybe our setup is not the right one because it's really intense. And I mean, if you're going to be studying from 9 to 5 for 12 weeks.
But let's go into that topic, I think, shortly, about, how do you actually reskill people in 12 weeks? Yeah. It would be really fun to just hear a bit more how you go about doing that. Just to close the topic a bit more about, how to find potential. Is it right to say you basically have 3 dimensions here then? One is the big 5, the personality traits. Another is the what's called competence profile, and
the big 5 is part of the competence profile. So the competence profile is set up by 2 parts. So the logical problem solving ability and the competence, the big 5 sort of personality traits.
You mentioned also empathy in some way.
Yeah, but that's part of the.
So it's part of the psychology. Okay, cool. Okay, so I think that's a big learning, I think, for a lot of companies, that they should focus more on potential than merits, right? When they do recruitment or whatever they do in trying to evaluate people. In some way. So true.
And how often don't we meet a typical CV recruitment exercise? Where we try to do a job description, we try to do that, and of course it hits the technicalities. You need to know this language, or you need to know this and that, but it doesn't recruit on potential at all, I would argue.
No, it doesn't. If you mean a regular CV, no.
And if you think about how many, okay, and then you have a lot of the big companies, of course, they have these tests in order to get to these points as well.
But they usually have them too late in the recruitment process for them to be actually, interesting properly.
Interesting. What do you mean with too late?
No, but usually, or, a lot of people use these sort of assessment tools as one of the final stages.
Yes.
So when you sort it out and you have maybe like 5 of them left, then you add on an assessment test to see what sort of traits they have. And then it's really hard to draw some, actual conclusions from them, because then you're only going to be probably like, yes, this certifies, or, this put emphasis on what I've already, found out during the whole process, which is usually really long. But the way that we use them, and to put this in perspective, when we do one of our programs and we're supposed to find maybe 10 or 12 people for a class, we have between 1,000 and 1,500 applicants.
Okay.
So I mean, it's a large sum of people to start with, and we do the test or the assessments as the first step, because that's our way of sorting out. We can just sort out the ones that's not going to be eligible for this kind of.
I'm very happy, because it validates some of my own best practices as well for recruiting. So I'm very glad that you said that. I'm meant to do it in the way that she said.
Wait, I have a question though. So that is a lot of people applying.
Yeah.
So how do you market that people actually see this? Do you have a database, or you work with Harvest for Milligan or something like that?
We do mainly on, as I said, we don't know who we're looking for. That's the sort of key here. So we need to look really broad. Yes. And what we do is we do social media, and we just put it out there. And of course, when you're then trying, for instance, if we're keeping to cloud developer, you can't start looking or talking about technical specifics, because that's not going to make sense to anyone. You have to say, like, are you interested in this thing? Come read more about our program. And when they read about it and they can see, like, and then we have to talk about a role in a more general terms, because we can't say, like, you're going to be doing these kind of things, and, these are the languages you're going to be using, because then we're just going to scare people off.
Right.
So you have to talk about it in like, are you good at, communicating? Do you understand system fast, or whatever it is, because it depends on the kind of role that you're going to be working in. But you have to put it in more general terms for people who doesn't know these things at the moment to feel like, oh, this could be me. Right. I'm good at sorting stuff. I'm good at seeing patterns. I'm good at sorting data, whatever it could be. And you can't just always retort to, like, have you played chess? I mean, it's boring.
Right.
So we have to.
Still, the numbers are very impressive.
I know.
But
nice.
can I take a deep breath and basically do a framing of the rest of the of some of the questions and how we are talking now, because what we have been talking about now and with Upskill here is actually the topic of unlearning old skills, relearning new skills, shifting jobs, and all this. And of course, now to set this up as a theme, as a backdrop to what we're talking about, we all understand that, we have heard that, we need 70,000 tech jobs in the next and then you had 200,000 if you think about reskilling tech guys. But I think we can agree upon that this is on a much more bigger scale what is happening right now, because first of all, we have already concluded, I think, and we can press it, that we are moving into an era of continuous learning. So the old school approach that we went to university and you learned for life and then you never again is simply not valid in the future, in the world we're living in. Number one, and number two, now with data and AI and tech moving into any process and everywhere, and it shifts things, changes things. We have an adult learning job in front of us of massive scale, I would argue. And it goes back to, are you going to be relevant in a society which is driven by tech, or that the tech and AI or whatever it is part of the productivity frontier that this company is on or this country is on? And if you're not really wanting to be part of it, you're going to have a problem as an individual, as a person finding a job, as a team, as an organization, as a society. So in this backdrop, the whole idea to have a theme and really go into recruitment, but more importantly, upskilling, relearning, unlearning, changing jobs, and all those different facets. I think there are so many things used to, with that sort of broader canvas.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's very interesting to continue in many different angles on that. So I think that's, to me, like the sort of the macro problem of what this pod today is all about. Would you?
Yeah, exactly. I agree, and I would say that the recruitment part of it is, I would say, only it puts sort of the finger on the tight spot when it comes to, do you actually look for the people that you're going to be needing for the future? Because before you concluded this, when we talked about what do you find when you look for merits and CV, and I think it was Stefan who said it last week, if I don't remember, if I remember correctly, that being an expert could be that you are, that you know everything about the past.
That's a good way of putting it. Yes, actually, he said that. Yes.
Yeah, and I thought that was such a good way of phrasing it, because maybe your old ways of doing things, or to put it bluntly, just because you were really good at something for the past 10 years, does it really mean that you have what it takes in the future? No, maybe not.
There are so many quotes, like really nice quotes. I need to paraphrase it. Knowledge is a nasty thing. Like, what you thought was knowledge or what made you an expert is obsolete just around the corner. So it's one of those things that really doesn't last.
Yeah, and speaking about having a learning, talking more about learning, one of these things that people are talking about today, considering that all these things, and of course you're working in the forefront of this, but the fact that the knowledge that a lot of people working in the workforce today have, like 50% of that is not going to be in use in, say, like 3 years. We're not talking 20 years here.
But I think also we need to still say that knowledge is useful. I think we also need to say that history is useful.
Definitely.
Even though the world is changing very rapidly, we can't say that people that know a lot is less valuable than people that don't know a lot of stuff.
No, but I think you have to, then I have to differ for the fact that knowing stuff doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to learn things, because it's the learning thing that's the most important part.
That's the differentiator, right?
Yeah, exactly. And
potentially having some frame of reference from the past and history is useful, and that allows them to learn faster.
Yeah, and I mean, when we're talking about learning, if we're going to do the big philosophical. Yeah, that's the word. I don't know. And when we talk about learning,
it's only 1 hour in the podcast.
Yeah, take another glass of beer and then it will be fine. It's philosophical.
When we talk about learning, we have to talk about doing mistakes. And if you're going to be able to draw from mistakes, then you have to know your history. And then you can either talk about what you did like a week ago when you messed up, or you can talk about 200 years ago when you messed up. Right. So history and learning and doing mistakes is always going to be.
And just to emphasize, knowledge is key, but the scary fact is that what is knowledge is moving, and you need to.
Yeah, scary, yes, but I really don't want to make it sound like it's bad to have knowledge.
No.
Knowledge is,
so the point was, you need to seek knowledge continuously.
Yeah. Yes.
So knowledge is the only thing that matters in terms of going forward. But you cannot rest on your laurels. You cannot leva på gamla meriter.
Exactly.
So that's I'm trying to point you.
And I think it can be useful as well to try to differentiate data, information, and knowledge here.
Yeah.
This is from like the Shannon works, but if you just have a person that is expert in remembering facts. I saw that, by the way, the Jonas von Essing, he won the postcode millionaire, and he's amazing, I think, in his ability to recall facts and store facts. But fact is one thing, and that's, you can call it information if you want to. I think, one way to define what data, information, and knowledge is to say data is just the numbers or the raw data that you have without any meaning attached to it at all. Then you can try to interpret that, and that brings you information. It doesn't necessarily mean that with that information you know how to do something. It just means that you know what it means. And then potentially when you move into having knowledge, that means that you also can interpret the information in a way that's useful for whatever task that you want to do. And I remember someone say that wisdom is also when you know why you should do something. But that's another story. But I think it's important to differentiate these kind of things. And knowledge is like a greater abstraction, a greater type
data
of
and information
that you have, where you can actually use it in a useful way.
And I mean, that's why I think the kind of programs that we do and the kind of people that we find when we talk about potential, because they have proven that they can use whatever knowledge that they had before, and they can add new things onto that. And then when they go out and actually learn the proper role and use this new kind of skill set that we've given them, that's when you really see the benefit of having knowledge from before and having experiences, but drawing from that in your new sort of tool set of skills that you've learned.
So maximizing the use, I guess, from historical knowledge into applying them for future.
Yeah, and also learning how to learn. I think one of the upskillers from our first class, he put it so well when we were done with these 12 weeks of intense training in a very, very specific field. And I asked him afterwards, to sum it up, where has this gotten you? And he was like, I'm not afraid anymore. It doesn't matter whatever people are telling me, something new or something whatever. And he was like, I'm not afraid, because I know I just have to start at one point and work from there. And then I'm gonna solve it.
So in some ways he had a profound experience by being going into a program that seems impossible. I'm going to learn a new job in 12 weeks. He actually got to know about himself and about techniques. How do you intensely immerse in a topic that allows you to take on any new task? And now he has done it once. So in theory, he can do it again.
Yeah, and he had some sort of degree from KTH, doing some sort of specific thing. But this was such an intense thing to learn, not only then the technical aspects, but also understanding how it relates to the business side, because of course we need to always think about the business side of things. But I think then also the fact that you're, the day after you've done with the 12 weeks of training, you're being thrown out into reality, and then you actually need to put this to work.
And it's also not only the knowledge you have gained, but potentially actually build up some kind of self-confidence that allows you to actually work in a better way.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think that the key thing here, drawing on what you said, is that the most important part, considering that the skill set that they learn under these 12 weeks is going to be obsolete as well during some point. But what they learn is that they learn the abilities to learn. They learn different methods and how to think about it.
They have gone through, they have extended their comfort zone. Oh my God, I can't learn a new trade.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, you did in 12 weeks, so you can do it again.
That's the not afraid part.
So now the comfort zone is extended there. But can I take one?
Can we close if you move into another topic, or?
Please close first. I'm moving into, it's all adjacent topics now, but close it now.
Okay, so we basically spoke a bit about, we're moving into an age of continuous learning, and then, the need for that. But why are we moving into an age of continuous learning? Can we just, close it in that way in some way? Can we measure that in some way? Why are we moving into an age where we need to continuously learn more than before?
I would say the easy answer to that one is because change is happening so quickly, and especially when we're talking about the technical development of things.
So and I think we all can agree that technological advances that we have seen in recent years is staggering.
Yeah.
And it's basically an exponential kind of progress that we're seeing. So that means that leads to that we also need to have more continuous
Yeah, of
learning.
course, because it doesn't look like it's going to slow down. So I think it's only going to be a matter of going even faster, maybe.
Me and Mika Klingvall has tried to do has had fun exploring this, and actually starting off trying to read in on Kurzweil's law of accelerating returns, highlighting innovation as something accelerating exponentially, which is mad when you say it like that. And then basically what it means is from a business point of view, the innovation pace, the pressure of innovation goes up in order to stay at what one term is the productivity frontier. So whatever any business you're doing, there's a sort of frontier, how much should it cost to do this activity, or, how productive should we be? And when we get to a point now that this is exponentially increasing, the old stable way of looking at a process and then incrementally improving that process means maybe that you get 10%, 20, 30% percentage gains. So you're doing it, you're improving on the old game. Now with technology, data and AI, we are talking about 10x in reduction in transaction costs. We are talking about we need to continuously reevaluate, can we completely do this task in a new way based on technology and innovation. And you have many different examples. You can go into the gigapresses of Tesla, that
Gigafactories.
Gigafactory. No, the gigapress.
They have a press.
The gigapress as a way to do a chassis in the gigafactory is completely rethinking, and you can go into data, and then, this is what I think is so different when we do data AI sugarcoating on top of an analog process to really rethink how a task is done in its core first principles idea, re-engineer how we think about this. And here now comes with Kurzweil's law, this pace is accelerating exponentially, so it means we are not living in a society that is measured in economies of scale and the ideas of the economics that we learned in the 60s and 70s. So we are starting to go into a new economic era, which some people term economies of learning. So here we are going into adaptability wins over efficiency. Continuous adaptability is the name of the game. And that's the reality that I think.
Who has the best ideas?
Who has the best ideas, and it is one thing, but who can adapt them and get them out? I mean, one thing is to have a great idea, is the adoption and crossing the chasm with that great idea through the whole company. That is really the point.
Yeah, keep in mind, fail fast. This also.
Yeah. But anyway, so that's I think there is a lot of research done that sort of highlights that, and you can say it in a blanket statement. We all know the change is accelerating, and so it will never go away.
I was thinking either we go to you speaking a bit more about how these 12 weeks of reskilling works, or did you have another topic to take?
Yeah, you were supposed to say something.
No, I mean I think that those 12 weeks is a very interesting topic. I was actually I want to explore different aspects of reskilling because because we have talked about this program now. I think it's good to, in this section now, stay here. How do you actually learn a new job in 12 weeks? How do you set that up?
It's not magic.
Yeah. Are you taking notes?
Always.
Well, how do you learn a new role in 12 weeks? Well, you have to start off with any sort of change. You have to have a very specific goal. And I really like the part because when we're out talking to clients and they have these sort of issues and
give us an example. You said cloud computing. I
yeah,
guess
exactly.
One,
yeah, that's a good one.
But it could be other things like.
Yeah, it could be anything. That we have decided to go into the tech field because there's an obvious need for it, and it's fairly easy to set up training in these kind of environments. So we'll just stick.
So someone comes to you, they say, okay, we need to have this person or people reskilling into being more knowledgeable in cloud computing.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you do?
Yeah, what do you do? So the first thing, first we set up the whole recruitment process, but that's one thing. We leave that to the side because that's just finding people. But then we have to dive into what the actual need is. Because if we're going to set up a training curriculum, to use fancy words, that stretches over 12 weeks, we have to know exactly what it is that we need them to know by the end of these 12 weeks. So then I always go into the technical discussions with, different people who works with these things. Because you can't have too high level of people in this kind of discussions because they don't know the details of it. And they always start off in the same way, like, no, it can't be done. Like,
really?
Okay, we'll leave that to the side right now. Just talk about,
So you find some tech experts, you try to get some answers for them, and they usually say, no, it can't be done.
Well, that's either they say it bluntly or I can see that they're thinking it. But you have to sort of start off with, because you have to put things into, a time frame. Of course, we're not going to be able to do architects or, experts in 12 weeks. That would be naive.
Can you make me a karaoke singer in 12 weeks?
Definitely.
I don't think so. That would be a fun thing.
You said you use no, it can't be done. You said it, right? She knows how to do it.
Exactly.
Okay.
I'll put you into some hard training.
Okay, awesome.
Imagine you being in a karaoke for 12 weeks every day.
Exactly.
8 hours a day.
I think this is a
I
bet, man.
think probably
Be
you have
careful
a good chance.
So if this can lead to a real bet, then Louise will put you through a 12 weeks, 12 hell week or a health week? Or
12 weeks of hell, yeah.
Or you just become like a karaoke master. The guy's like, okay, so the next song goes to you, and that is also good. But they sing very nice.
Yeah, but back to the real story.
The real story, yeah. So you need to sort of, and I call this the kill your darlings phase, because it's sort of like a recruitment process. At first, people give you this huge list, like, oh, they need to know this, they need to know that, and they're going to be, X amount of time with these, and they should know these aspects, and they should know these functions.
The Christmas wish list.
Yeah, and I guess it's what recruiters usually get handed from somebody, like, just tick the boxes, and everybody needs 10 years of experience within everything. So you start off with that, and you're like, but this is not gonna, this is not gonna work in 12 weeks. So we need to narrow it down. And then I usually set a time frame, and I say, like, but what are they actually gonna be working with for, say, the first 6 months? Because that's a good time frame to put things into. And then you start, okay, they don't need to know these things, and maybe we don't have to have, these functions we're not really working with. Kubernetes, we can take that later. And you're like, okay, yeah, let's take that one later. And then you end up with a list of like, okay, but this is what they need to do. And for the Azure class, we did a very integration heavy focused training, because for where this company was in their sort of cloud journey, that's what they were going to be doing firsthand for the first 6 months. So, okay, let's focus on integrations then. You were about to say something.
I just wanted to, I love when you speak tech words. So you said Azure, cloud computing, you had Kubernetes,
Integration.
And you also mentioned integration. So I guess in this case, it's something about, some company that wants to integrate their existing systems into some kind of cloud Azure system and having integration towards it, built on some container platform, Kubernetes based in some way. Is that correct?
Yeah, well,
Exactly.
yes.
No,
Just say
please,
yes.
No. Please elaborate if I'm wrong.
No, but I think that the first one was that they were actually, they were transitioning from being on-prem heavy, and then they were moving towards being more.
So they need a shitload of people to migrate to the cloud.
Yeah, exactly,
And the
and to set it
core
up.
problem was how can we do migration at scale, at mass? We need
exactly,
more
yeah.
migration engineers.
And, a very, very in production heavy company that, of course, can't just do things too spread out over too much of a time. So, yes, they needed people who could do
Took
this.
Spotify more than 5 years, but okay, go ahead.
But so you have to find that sort of, the 6 months. I think that's usually a good time frame to look upon. What are they going to be doing on a daily basis? And then I usually ask people, like, what are they going to do? Like,
Don't dream about the future. Concretely,
No, exactly.
what's going to be the task? Really rock hard. I
What
fully
sort
agree.
of, sprint planning? What are you going to give these people? What are they going to do? And then you sort of back engineer from that. And when you have that list of this is what they need to know, And then you reverse engineer and you see like, okay, what sort of steps do we need to
back
fill?
engineer. I was trying to figure out what does
sorry.
back engineer mean. But it's a good term.
Now I'm going into making up words. This always happens.
Reverse engineer.
Reverse engineering. So then you sort of see like, okay, if they're going to be able to do these things, what sort of things do we have to learn?
Yes.
And for this Azure training that we did, we started off with having like 3 or 4 weeks of just intense C#, like a boot camp in the boot camp, just to make sure that people had the basic
basics,
knowledge of knowing these things.
And C# being the programming language, of course.
Yes, exactly. I'm speaking with experts here, so. But then we added on and we set this up like almost an agile project. So we had each week like a sprint. So you started off with, doing sprint planning. What are we going to do? And then you ended up the week with doing some sort of retrospective or maybe a demo or something. So for each week they started using, the most basic parts of Azure functions and then adding on for the rest of the 8 weeks. Because we had 3 or 4 weeks ahead of the C# training. And so they
got some, just so I understand, they got some, for the first week or first 2 weeks, they got some very, very basic tasks they want to complete
they
on
were,
Azure.
exactly. So just putting stuff up in, just building the smallest little piece.
Yeah.
And then they added on for the rest of the week. So each week was like opening a new function, learning what it was, how do I use it, and then eventually they had covered all the different stuff that we've set up for them to do.
But let me butt in, because if I hear you right now, so it's not the level of concreteness when you are doing sort of killing your darlings and reverse engineering is actually it's down to concretely how have you set up Azure, what is your buckets all about. How are you planning to, what integration language should they use, and where should they place it, and what should the folder structure be?
Yep.
And then basically, so the first week we learn the first step of taking something to cloud, and then the next week we learn this and this. So in a sense, you broke down, you reverse engineer what a typical migration project within that company on Azure should look like according to their standard architecture. And those design patterns you then reverse engineer. So basically now in 12 weeks, you're going to do this project, dry run it until you know all the steps and functions.
Yeah.
Is that a summary?
Yeah, that's a good summary. A very good one. Thank you. But I think that's also the fun part about doing those sort of kill your darling sessions, because it usually leads up to having really interesting discussions on the client side about how are we actually going to work? What is our,
do we
method
have any
and
design
system?
patterns?
Exactly. And not only how are we doing things today, but how do we want to do them in the future?
So the learning becomes a design phase as well, or a planning phase.
Yeah.
Actually, you're going out to the cocky and solution architects.
Exactly.
They think they have done it, and they've done the PowerPoint high-level design. But actually now, when you're going to teach this now, which folder should I put it? What should be the extension on this folder? Oh, I haven't thought about that. And there's no standard on this level. So actually, you are helping them going to the middle protocol level design patterns that they don't have when you look at the PowerPoint.
And then we don't, since we're sort of topic independent, so we never have trainers on our own side. I mean, I can handle a technical conversation, that's fine. But we always bring in proper experts who know what they're talking about. And they are usually in this kill your darling phase to be able to ask even more specific questions, like, okay, but if that is your goal about how you want your cloud, native world to function in a year, shouldn't they be learning these things instead? Shouldn't we add on these things? And then we can take those things away. So it's really interesting, it's really interesting conversations.
So you're talking now, the people who becomes the educators, the tutors for the class are super senior, so they actually go in and can really work with the client.
Yeah, we bring on like more specific consultancy firm who are really good at the topic specifically, and they get to set up the training parts, because I know the model of it. I know how we're gonna place it during these 12 weeks and how we're going to, the boxes that we're going to fill. But they have to come in with the actual knowledge about what it is that we, the reverse engineering about, okay, if this is what they need to know, then this is what we need to teach them.
So in a way, actually, by bringing in those consultants as part of this game, I think there's this different type of value add here more than the training, because you are sort of not challenging, but you're making them think in order to be able to do this concrete training in 12 weeks. They really need to think, and then you end up probably finding a couple of frogs or gaps.
Exactly. Also, that's a really interesting process, which I really like doing.
Is it painful for the client? Well, because sometimes we know it so well, don't we? And then they don't always.
And then you usually push the sort of sore, where it hurts a bit, because during those things that they maybe haven't really decided, or there's like, oh, but I want to go this way and you're going to want to go that way, but now we have to decide. But then when we set up, I'm going to bring back to actually doing the training, and if we're going to keep this Azure program as an example, and what we realized, because of course when we then place them, they're going to be working with different sort of nuances between these things. They're going to add up in teams who primarily works with third-party solutions, or they're going to go into analytics or whatever. So there's going to be, everybody's going to end up in different places, even though the core of it is the same. But what they learn is that they learn how to learn new things. So when they go out into the different teams with the sort of the ground training or the basic training that they had, they just keep on, finding new functions in Azure or new functionalities, or learning, okay, now I need to add on this thing, or I need to add these functions, or, do a service bus or whatever it's called. Now I'm just saying words.
It sounds like an awesome service. But speaking of that, I was thinking that, it would be fun to just hear a bit more. What is the business model really of Upskill Company? How does it work?
How does this work? Well, considering that we are sort of selling on potential, so when people sign on and we get a client to have this sort of need, and I think a crucial point here before I go into the details of how the business model works, when people ask me like, who do you want to meet at a company? Who should I present you to? And I always say like, I want to meet the person who hurts the most.
What?
And this is, there's logic to this, because the one who has the most issues, when the skills gap is actually something that hurts, you don't reach your goals. You cannot actually do the sort of functions or do the productions that somebody higher up wants you to do, because you don't have the competence for it. Bring me to that person and we're going to have a good conversation. Because those are the ones who are most prone to actually try something new, because obviously what you've done before hasn't worked for you. So let's try something new. But the business side of things is, of course, that we bring on, as we usually say, we take all the risk. So up until the point where we do all the marketing to find these, 1,000 people who are going to apply for this role, and then we set up the whole recruitment process, and we set up the training, and the actual cost comes for the client as a regular consultancy setup. So they pay for them by the hour, and they do that for a specific amount of time, a year, because the end goal of this project is not for them to just add on more consultants. The end goal is after a year, they get to hire them as employees. So that's sort of in
after a year?
Yeah, after a year.
Sorry, I missed some point here, but okay. You have some person, you find, you do the recruitment, you train them, and I guess you basically hire them in some sense?
Yeah, we hire them from the start.
Yes.
So they get paid during the training.
Right. And then after a year, you basically release them, so to speak. Or
yeah, exactly. So what I probably missed in my explanation here is that you do the 12 weeks of training, and the day after the training is done, then you go out to your new team at the client's place and you start working.
And they're committed to go into training, to consulting.
Yeah, exactly. So they're hired by us, and they know that they're going to be all throughout the marketing and the whole process. They know what client they're going to end up with. So the Upskill Company is just sort of, the good friend who holds your hands while you do this transitioning from one role to another one.
Then 1 year, you said?
Yeah, 1 year.
And what happens if it fails?
Well, people have a mind of their own. So if somebody want to quit, then they're more than free to do so. If it doesn't work out, I mean, if somebody, what are you doing? Sorry, I was. No, but if somebody want to drop out for whatever reason, if it wasn't for them, then they're free to do so. And that's good for the security for the client side as well. Like, if they would feel like a person isn't a good fit, or if it doesn't work out, then they have a month notice period, like any other kind of consultancy.
And basically, the company, the client that you have, pays for 1 year of consultancy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then, so if you look at it, it's just a slightly more advanced recruitment process, because then you have to, what is it called? Provanställning in English.
Yeah, what's that good? What's
Yeah,
that called in
provanställning.
English?
test hire.
Yeah, there is a word
probationary,
for it.
probation period.
Well,
our English skills are impressive here.
yeah, exactly.
Can we stop there on the business model? I would like to explore, have you done, what's the difference when you look at upskilling for the very technicalities of a job versus other business skills or software skills? Because sometimes when you reverse engineer, it's not only about the technical skills. You're going to work in a team, and you're going to work in an environment. So I assume there are other parts of the upskilling which is not purely technical.
Definitely.
Can we elaborate a little bit about the differences about upskilling in more software or business oriented areas versus the pure tech ones?
Well, the more technical parts is of course very heavily based on doing stuff practically. We don't have room to be theoretical about things. You have to put things into practice. That's the only way to make people sort of ready to go by the end of the training. So they need to put everything into practice. But when it comes to the other aspects, which of course we were talking about in the recruitment process as well, it's not only about being logical and able to solve problems. You need to have the other capabilities that's going to be useful in a working environment.
And of course, when you have reversed engineer, you probably have reversed engineered on the software part or business parts as well.
And I would say that one of the finer things in looking for potential is that we can make sure that we have those with us from the start. So we look a lot like, how are you with your communication skills? How do you collaborate in a team? Those other aspects of being a professional person that likes to work and who thrives in some sort of team effort, we can look for those in the start, because we're adding the skill set later. So we can make sure that the person that we bring in is a good person that's going to be a good add-on, no matter what the sort of skill set is. And that's a good thing. So it all starts with finding the right people, because without the right people coming into the program is not worth that much. So that's a very important aspect. But I would say during the 12 weeks of training, there's about 9 weeks that's the technical parts, which would then translate into like Monday to Thursday for each week. And then on Fridays we do different things. And I don't like the term soft skills, I have to say.
No, but please teach me a better. I don't necessarily like it either, but I don't know.
I've heard different aspects, and I'm trying to decide which one I like the best. But I've heard both human skills, which I think is good.
That's good. I like that better already.
Yeah, exactly. But then I also heard power skills, and I sort of like that one because it draws on what you were saying, Anders. Like, unless you have this different aspect of things. Like communications and collaborations and whatnot. Exactly. Then, the other stuff is not worth that much. So if you call them power skills because they are like playing a game, they're your power-ups.
The superpowers.
Yeah, exactly.
This is your power-ups.
They make the skill set you have even better. So I'm leaning towards power skills.
Because my first. When you said power skills, it was almost like power, the boss. So, but when you then put it in the gaming, like you have this one, and here you have your your superpowers that sort of
the magical unicorn or whatever it is.
Your power skills that alleviates whatever you have as your technical
because
skills.
that is what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, working in a
your
profession.
boost skills.
Exactly.
It's boosting the other. Yeah, I like it. Because soft skills is tricky, yeah?
Yeah.
So what do you do on Fridays?
What do we do on Fridays? Well, we talk a lot about what you were initially talking about, you know, the self-leadership. How do we teach people to become more secure? Because it is, I mean, sitting here at the table with you two who've been doing this for a very long time, it was probably, okay, apart from the karaoke thing, but being a beginner at something is very special.
I've been doing that for a long time as well. I just haven't improved.
But, you know, being in a position where you feel like you suck and that you don't, you know, what the hell am I doing here? I'm going to be able to, you know, add any kind of value. That's a straining thing. And I think especially adding on the perspective that these are highly functional people who are used to bringing a lot of value.
Yes.
And who are used to doing good work. So when you put them in this very fragile, maybe, position, you need to add on the different power tools or power sets or power skills in order to feel like they have something to work from. So what we usually do is we have, of course, for the first couple of weeks, we do a lot of group dynamics. We need to get the group to come together because they're going to be so dependent on each other. And they work up such a dynamic because you can just imagine how much fun it's going to be to just, you know, dive into a new topic and just learn for 12 weeks. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah. But if you speak some numbers, I mean, if you get 1,000 or 1,500 applicants to that, you have some kind of filtering and sorting, and they do all the testing, you know, that you spoke about.
Testing is first, yeah.
And then you select a few people. Let's say a company, I don't know, want to hire 5 people or something. Or is that a normal thing? Or
when we do the client-specific classes, we need at least like 8. Up until 12, because over 12, I think it's more of like a, you know, when you're speaking to an audience, it's hard for people to just.
So let's say the company wants to hire 10 people then.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you get a group. Is that usually around 10 people then, or do you take in like 20 and then you filter out something during the year of?
No, everyone that we bring in, because the last stage of the recruitment process is that the clients always get to choose. They have the final selection.
Yes. Okay.
Because we can make sure that a person is valid and, you know, good and is going to be able to go through this whole process, but it's always up to the client to say like, yes, you know, Henrik is somebody that I want to bring onto my team, because of course the ultimate goal is for them to be hired. So they need to feel like you are a person that they want to have on board. So everybody who sits in the classroom know that they have a place. Because if we would bring in more people and then you would
have the company already selected after the 12 weeks directly, or
no,
when?
Before.
Oh, before the 12 weeks.
So there is a filtering out, and then maybe here's 20 candidates. Now you pick 10 that can go to the training, and those 10 are guaranteed to work with you for a year.
I realized I was not clear about this, so I'll do the really quick one. So we have loads of applicants who do the tests, and then maybe 80% of those fall out. So out of the one who do the test, we look for the motivation. Why do you want to do this? So they get to ask a lot of questions, and also, you know, are you okay with these terms which are going to be applied during this year? And when people say yes to that, and then we start doing the interviews. Deep interviews, and then we do some sort of speed dating. And when we have the final selection of like, okay, these are 15 people or 20 that we feel like we want to hire and we feel like they are going to be able to do this, then we present them to the client. And then the client make the final decision.
Cool. So they have an interview as well with each of the candidates?
Exactly, and that's an interesting topic as well, but we can go into that one later.
I added it already, so for one, it would be interesting to hear how you do the interviews, and then the second one, you know, how they do the interviews, because I think that's a skill that a lot of people and companies are interested in hearing more about. Cool. Okay, so you have the Fridays, you have the group dynamics, you have people, and you have people that have been picked already, so to speak, and what is group dynamics? Can you just give some examples? What do you actually do?
Well, since they are in a very specific situation where they, because doing these kind of projects, when you put, let's say then, 10 people in a group, and they know that they are starting from scratch and they need to learn something for 12 weeks, and then they're going to go out and produce some sort of value. And these are smart people. I'm going to say it once again because it adds on to the sort of dynamic that we bring. But they need to, because a lot of the training or the method of learning how to learn is going to be that you also draw on each other. So you need to share the information that you gather. And it's always funny to see that during certain weeks, you have certain people who feel like, this is, easy peasy. I got this. And then you see that they grow into the fact that they get to teach the ones who doesn't have as easy during these weeks.
Oh, that's a positive sign, right?
Yeah, and then after a few weeks, it's going to be the reverse, because there's always like different aspects of the training that's going to be, people are going to have an easier time to draw from. So that's what I mean with dynamics, because they need to sort of just level out the, like this is mine, or I'm going to be ahead of you. And we've had a couple of Americans on our programs, and one of the first things that they said was like, oh, there's no competition. And we need to sort of get that competition feeling out of the way as soon as possible. So we do, regular, team building exercises, personal presentation, what has shaped you into what you are today.
Why is competition dangerous?
Because it keeps people from sharing the knowledge.
So the group grows stronger, the brain index of the group becomes higher, they get further as a group if they really start taking away those boundaries, so to speak.
They need to help each other.
Yeah, it's part of the game for this to work in 12 weeks. They need to help each other. Like you have a Navy SEAL team, and you bring the whole team with you from the Hell's Week. The whole group needs to come through. Yeah. Interesting, very interesting.
I mean, the group has already been selected, right? So they need to stick together in order to survive. So this is actually really, really similar to what the Navy SEALs are doing, right?
Yes.
I had the same thought as well. That is so fantastic.
Yeah, it's very powerful, and in other circumstances than like if I take that military example, or of group dynamics and how to excel further than the individual, so to speak. The group can actually learn more if they really get that happening. Super interesting that you're working in that way.
Very interesting. Yes. Should we move into the interview kind of section?
Yes, I think that's a good segue here.
Yeah. Okay, so you basically said there are at least two type of interviews, one that you perform yourself and one that the clients does. Can you speak about your best practices of how to perform an interview?
Well, first of all, it has to be sort of structured. So you cannot fall into the habit of, you're from Farsta. Let's talk about, our connection to a certain place or aspects. So you need to be data-driven, I guess, is the correct word. So you always ask the same questions to every candidate in order to get some sort of collection of answers that you can draw conclusions from. And of course, you're going to be in a different setting when you can't sort of tick off the boxes of have you had X amount of experience in X amount of languages, or have you done these kind of things. So when you talk about aspects of like how do you do structured work, or what sort of administrative tasks have you done in this sort of fashion or manner. And we did a program for ServiceNow, which is a platform for ITSM, so IT systems, or IT service management, I think is the correct term. And then we added on, how have you worked with some sort of support functions? How have you handled when people had issues that you need to in some way solve? So what I was talking about when Goran asked, how do you set up the sort of marketing phase? How do you get people to apply? And then you have to think backwards again. Like if we cannot ask you about specific things that you have done, but rather what the specific thing acquires, then you have to find different things to ask for. And I think, you never work isolated. So you always have to ask questions about how you perform in a team, what you add to working in a team, and those different sort of questions. But then today, I think it's always important to ask, like, since we are working in the technical field of things, of course, all our candidates need to have shown some sort of interest, because today there's such a vast ocean of courses and programs and stuff that's so easily accessible. So if you come to me and say that you want to be a cloud developer and you haven't done shit, I'm not going to take your word for it.
Yes.
But if you tell me that you do knitting patterns for fun, and that you've also tried to do some coding in Python, then of course I'm going to know you're going to be a good candidate. But I think those sort of features. But that draws on to the next sort of conversation when you have with the client. Because it's so easy for them to fall into the habit of asking for, the specific listings that you want to have on your resume.
Checking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we do a lot of, training.
You had to coach the client how to interview, because it's not a merit type interview.
Like, this is a conversation. This is not an interview where you get to tick the boxes. You have to ask them stuff, because you have to, try to find out if this is going to be a person that you want to bring onto your team.
So you're emphasizing with the client now that we have done all the gauging and they will learn. But here you need to now recruit on potential, and you need to recruit the person and how the person will fit in the team. And here, of course, what style of work, what personalities will fit into this context, in this job, and also given maybe the co-workers that already is there. We need less of that style, we need more of that style in this team to be balanced.
And that sort of goes back to that initial phase when we try to find out, what do they actually need to know. And I think it's so funny, because I don't think I ended up there when we were visiting that sort of area. And that is when you're sort of done with these whole discussions and you've killed all the darlings and you have this sort of, the basics of what they need to know. And I always love the fact that there's always somebody in the room who says like, okay, but you know what? If you just give me the right kind of person, skills doesn't matter. They'll learn.
And is that something that you have grown stronger in believing, or has that always been your belief, or is this so obvious now when you've seen this in action?
Well, it's obvious that it works on scale. I think I've known it by heart, because I have such a diverse background where I have sort of a tendency to just dive into the deep end of stuff and be like, I'll manage. So I know that there's a lot of things that you can draw on from your experience that doesn't naturally match the ones that you're currently in. But if you have the ability to sort of adjust and make sure that you use things in new ways, then it's going to work out. But to see it in scale is very, very, very fun.
But if you want to, I think this is a segue to more societal topic of how we think about talent and recruitment, and also how this big upskilling game is all about. But let's conclude this first. If you have some more,
see if we can conclude it. I mean, I'm trying to see, there are do's and don'ts about how to perform an interview, and of course we can say that just trying to check for merits in a CV is perhaps not the best approach.
No.
And then you still want to in some way find the potential of the person when speaking to them. Perhaps if you could, do you have some example questions that you prefer yourself, or some way that you assess a person when you speak to them?
I don't do the recruitment process myself, but I like to ask those questions like, what have you done previously, privately or professionally, that you think is going to translate well into this new role?
Yes.
Because when you see how somebody thinks about how they can translate other kind of knowledges into this new field, that's when you sort of hear like if this is going to be a good one or not.
So the question pushes them to think about the new role, thinking what they've done, and connecting.
Yeah. And then you also hear like, has this person tried to understand what this new role means? So there's a lot of aspects to what comes up in it, and also the self-awareness about what are my strengths that I can transfer into something else. because the transferal part of this is really important.
You know, I've been doing interviews for so long, like 15 plus years, so I have my own way of doing it, and I don't want to go into it because that can help.
You have to go into it.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
now
I
you
don't
have to
think
say
so.
something. What are your best questions?
But of course, you know, fact checking is horrible. Checking for skills and merits is not a good thing. But I don't want to ruin, you know.
Yes, you need to ruin now.
Yeah.
You open the gate, so
You're not getting away from this.
By the way, he's doing that all the time. He's
so
a little bit like, he's always saying halfway and then getting all of us. So shut up or put up.
No, but I think you said,
right, let's
well,
do this with the music a little bit, right? Like
No.
10 tips by Anders. How to do
This is about
Go.
Louise. So, you know, let me phrase it like this.
All right, 5 tips.
I just want the best. I don't care about the rest. I just want the best questions that you have.
Yeah. No, but I agree, of course, that we need to have a way to ask, you know, for open questions. And for me, at least, it is like a double thing. The question is partly about, you know, trying to see if they can have an understanding of some part of the skill that you want to do, if it's cloud computing or whatnot. But it's also about communication skills. So at least I'm trying to combine the two. So with every question you ask, it should be also a way to evaluate if a person can communicate something in an efficient way. And then I usually stress them a bit as well. Do you do that as well, or?
No, I'm always super nice.
Really?
No, but I don't try to stress them. This is sort of a stressful situation anyhow. I mean, being an interview is always stressful. I was scared shitless coming here today, but even though this is just a conversation, you see, we're switching here. No, but I think being in a situation where you have an interview, you maybe really want this job for whatever reason, and to give people the best sort of situation or setting to actually give proper answers, I would not stress people out, because that's
sometimes, you know, people can really, you know, put up a performance. They can have been really well prepared to give some answers, and if you really want to understand at least the personality of a person, and perhaps you didn't have the full set of tests or whatnot that otherwise would be really useful to have, how do you really assess the more, you know, personality traits of a person? For that, I think you need to at least do something to get under the skin, so to speak.
Yeah, but I mean, you were sort of answering your own question there, because you said if you
Yes, I know.
if you give a question that people can prepare for, of course you're going to get prepared answers.
I have to add something, because I think that we cannot actually take it that there is like a uniform way how to conduct an interview, because as you can see, that the purpose of what they are doing is actually to enable the people to see the potential of change. So if you get into an interview that from a beginning it's intimidating probably for the person, how will they trust in the process of 12 weeks actually accomplishing something which is in their thoughts maybe impossible? So I believe that you don't want to stress them, but then if you want to have like a high performance team, like you are, for example, like you want to have like a coding and you need to do, I don't know, do that under some very weird circumstances, then stress test would be super great. In sales, for example, we would do a practical test. So pitch me, right? And that is a stressful enough.
Yes.
But depending on the interview, so you cannot basically take like, okay, this is the best. So there must be a best scenario of interviewing for every different job title there is.
Yes, and there are so many ways to do interviews. I've tried so many of them during my years, and there are merits with every one of them. But in short, trying to do that in a short period of time as well, because it's really time consuming to do interviewing.
But let's do it around here. So name one characteristic that you will put like a high rate. This is actually what I look for in a person.
Communication skill.
All right, communication. For me, can I trust this person? Very important, and you can actually learn that very, very quickly. Louise?
I really like people who don't necessarily need to go by strict rules.
Right.
difficult.
So
Communication.
that is creativity, thinking outside of the box.
Yeah,
thinking, right?
Yeah, something like that.
All right. Okay, good.
I'm not sure I can. What's the word for it? Communication skills is broad, and I think I look for that. But a lot of times, I don't know, have a good word for it. I want to see or feel how does the candidate connect and can interrelate to whatever picture I'm painting. So there's different techniques also. Do you interview without painting a picture, what the job is all about? Is it questions to prepared? What I like to do sometimes is to paint a picture, of the vision, of the target, what we're here to achieve, what the work will be all about. And typically I play it much worse. I play it as it's a tough job, it's going to be tough change, but I play it even worse. And then I want to...
Elephants burning.
Yeah, elephants burning, But never sugarcoating, this will be the most awesome job. This will be all parts. It will be some dirty parts, it will be some fun parts. We will have fun. But what I'm looking for or listening to after is how is the person able to connect with the vision or the idea, what we are trying to do. And that is of course communication skills. But it's also, did he listen to what I said, and did he now frame what he was doing, and could he relate to it with what he's been doing in other jobs?
So now one.
I might change my mind to something more specific.
You need to think
That's
about
all right.
I don't know what the word is. Connecting to.
I know it sounds like you're almost saying like seeing a vision or sharing a vision or.
Yes, but it's
seeing some sort of.
Yes, but how can he share, or how can he understand the vision in the short term and start linking to it or connecting with it? So I don't know, I don't have a good word for it. What's the word for connecting to the ideas?
I think connection is a very
connection.
Good word. It's a chemistry between two people.
But it's not only chemistry between us as people. It's is there a connection? Can he draw conclusions and connections?
And I think that basically we also overstate a bit. Or we overthink a bit when we hire a person that he needs to be specific for the job, and he's gonna, he's coming and from the day one he's actually gonna do the job like it is. Even if he's a data scientist, let's say he's a salesperson, etc. He used to sell, medical supplies, and suddenly now he needs to sell events. That is a long-term sale, that is a short-term sales, right? He has the skills, but I have seen many people failing in that. They cannot, because the way how they are taught to sell is not applicable to events or, let's say, short-term sales. So they need to relearn everything from scratch, even though they have the competence already. Right? Or maybe data science, now they're working in Python and suddenly they need to do Julia. Is that a stress enough?
Yeah. But communication skills and, I don't know, connecting or being able to relate.
I have a different one.
Yes.
Or I think I summed it up. Curiosity.
Curiosity is good. It's a good one.
So we had communication, trust, curiosity, and
Connection.
Connection.
Right.
Relating.
Right. All right. Cool. I think we
But
did good.
Can I to close this topic? I want to ask a question from another angle. So we always ask, what is your best tips for asking questions? What questions should we ask? I want to flip it. What should we be? What is your best tips? What to be listening for? What are we actually listening for? Because a lot of times, I think you exemplified it. We ask for something, but we are actually listening for two things. We are asking something, and there is a textbook answer, but I'm listening in how he answers. So what are we? What are the biggest tips? What should your ears be doing in an interview as an interviewer?
So the no-nos. Okay, this is like a red flag, or?
No, it doesn't need to be red. It can be both positive and negative. But when you are doing I flip it. You ask the question not because it's fun, because you want to find something out. And then sometimes when you want to find this out, it's very subtle, or it's not it's not what it says. Sometimes it's how it says it, or So what are we actually listening for? So do we have any tips on listening?
Yeah, but I think Anders was onto something there.
Yes.
With the fact that you said that you're trying to then put maybe some stress so you're not the answer that somebody has repeated to themselves. And I think maybe that is something to listen for. And I'm gonna now go on stretch and say that that's linked to curiosity, that if you see that when you ask a question and somebody actually thinks about it, like they listen to what you said and they actually think about, okay, how do I respond to this in an honest way? Maybe that is something to listen to, whatever the kind of question is.
That's why I think communication skills is such a profound thing, because it really means that if someone can listen, communication means listening as well. It means that they can reason. That means it can build up their world model, so to speak, structure their thoughts, and quickly come up with some kind of reasoning skills about what the answer should be, and then formulate that in a short and very precise and clear way. That is a very powerful set of skills.
So when you fill communication skills with all the sub-facets here, you are listening now for, did he easily and fast pick up and understand what I was talking about? I mean, like, I want people to be fast, typically, in understanding. Did he analyze? Did he?
It can be a she as well. So saying he all the time.
Sorry,
so
I
Kirill
really
was very
apologize.
fast here to pull out like, hey, all right, so.
Good, very good. Hen.
They.
It doesn't work in
They.
English.
It doesn't work in
They.
English.
It's a höna in English.
You can use they.
They. So I think with the questions, I think you're listening and analyzing. Are they able to empathically listen to what I'm saying, reflectively listen to what I'm saying? Are they able to internalize it, analyze it, and then come up with something that is sort of answering something that makes sense in relation to what I asked? So like, because you have examples where they good oikskaft. So like, so you ask a question and they answer a textbook answer. But it's a politician answer. He didn't answer me, or he didn't even try to answer me. He just gave me the textbook.
It's the press department answer of things.
Exactly. So I think the listening skills here is about, that's how you get to underline. And now I'm empathizing with the communication skills, the way you are framing what you are looking into, the subheadings, Anders.
But I have to add something here, and that is that communication skills can be utterly deceiving as well. Because it's easy to fall for the, somebody who's good at rhetorics and who knows how to say things. It's easy to sort of fall into the trap of not actually listening to what they're saying. Yes. So being a good communicator is not only about, you were talking about being fast, but being good at communication doesn't necessarily mean that you're fast in your response or that you can give these stage good answers.
If you're a sociopath, you're really, really good at communication. And that's a really dangerous person to hire.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So that
tricky one.
It is not sufficient for sure.
No.
It can be very deceiving.
Yes. So you need to be really good in trying to assess the people in different ways. So it's certainly not sufficient. But I think it's a.
But do you have any listening tips? If you
listen to the person?
Yeah, like when you're interviewing, what are you mindful?
I have like a very very structured way of doing my thing, but it sounds when I'm doing. I don't want to give out how I do interviews because I do it so often. So
one day he will retire and write like
but you have to say your best question.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes.
And of course, this is going to be out of the
there
technical
is one
terms.
question that I do always, every time, and I'm not going to say it. So
No.
sorry.
After.
What is your favorite question?
I think this draws from the fact that I've been a project manager for such a long time and always trying to combine different what people want and different needs and different things. So I always ask what annoys you the most?
No, I actually asked a similar question. It's not my top one, but I actually add one of and that is really, how can I annoy you the best? That's actually a really good question, I think.
What are you aiming to get from that question?
Very easy. I mean, you want to understand the attitude of the person.
Right.
Yes.
And I also think that it's a good question to see how somebody's going to be, somebody's going to be working in a team setting. Yeah. If somebody says something outrageous or something that is going to be happening in any kind of team setting, then that this is not the person who's going to be doing well. Yeah. So I like that question.
But
yes,
okay,
I like it.
I think let's leave it here. I want to move into a little bit more societal, philosophical angles on the same theme here.
Finally.
No, so let's start like this. How important for society is upskilling and reskilling, and how big of a problem is it on a societal scale?
I can start, but it's a very, very broad topic. So I think that if we start off with, do we need to keep learning? Yes, of course we need to do. Do society as a whole prompt learning, especially as you get older and maybe then more, I don't know, established in your role? No, we don't. You can just go to the extent of, what do we celebrate? Do we celebrate people being beginners and being, shit at stuff? No, we don't. We celebrate people who have done things for 25 years and who have achieved things or who have a certain hierarchy or whatever. So that's on a very, very philosophical level.
So on a philosophical level, we are not geared to leave a career and relearn or reskill.
No.
I have to actually admit to having to take a technical break for 3 minutes.
We take it.
Sorry.
No way.
I'm sorry to say that.
No way. That is the third time in 88 episodes.
I know. I'm
All
very
right,
sad.
all right.
But I have one question,
Yeah.
and you can think about it. And please don't answer it until I get back.
I promise.
But I think one.
The pipes are going just because.
Shut up. Okay, so one problem I think that we have in the society today is that we have a very traditional way of thinking about education, meaning that you go to school in the early years and you go to university and then you work and that's it. And potentially then you can think, and we haven't even spoken about Elon Musk yet either, so we have to
We can leave him out today, actually.
We can't leave him out, Anders. We can't leave him out.
Can we? Okay. But anyway, he actually were starting a PhD, but he, interrupted or stopped doing it and went to work instead. Anyway, what is really the proper way more of the future of education? I think, we said in the beginning that we, of course, want to have more continual learning or continuous learning. Continual is another thing. Continuous learning. And then the question is really, should we start working earlier? Because we still need to continuously learn anyway. And what is, in that case, is the role really of our schools and universities that we have today? But please don't answer it.
No, I don't.
Taking a small.
I can talk to Henrik about what he means on, learning on a societal level.
So upskilling and reskilling on a societal scale. We talked. We looked at the fundamental patterns of celebrating. Our patterns is to celebrate long-term careers. So we have 25 years. And we're not really celebrating to be new beginners in a new field. So already here we have sort of in our culture or in our values, we haven't really thought about reskilling or upskilling as a very. It's not the natural path, and it needs to be the natural path, maybe.
But is that true?
I would argue that in the Swedish natural path, Volvo, Villa, Volvo, Villa, Vove, and 2 children, and then you work in the same company for quite some time, and then you might change company, but you are jumping in the industry.
Yeah, exactly.
But you and me, we have been talking about this reskilling for a long time.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why I really got excited to speak with Louise, and that is how we actually.
We talked about your business model in 2015.
Yeah.
And we saw how big. Massive scale.
But calculated like this. So first, I think that if we are looking at, you said that, this is new. It's not new. In the 90s, everybody, the entire workforce was actually forced to train how to operate with a computer, right? So there it is. And before that, it was, I don't know. After that, it was internet. And before that, it was something else. And it doesn't matter, right? The problem with the reskilling, and I said, this decade is going to be the decade of reskilling because you mentioned 77,000 people. And then in the IT sector that we are missing. And then you mentioned a number of 200,000, right? So, and in 2015, when we did a data innovation the first time, at that point of time, we were contacting all the universities and asking them if they have a data science program. It was not. There was no. There was like a deep
Very
learning.
few.
Very few. We didn't have like a curriculum that was on data science.
Computer science, yes, and you had
Yes.
the classical like Anders and then went to, but on a broader scale, no.
Yeah, so the point was that basically even today when we have a majority of university offering courses in data science, machine learning, etc., are they capable to saturate, let's say, or supply that 77,000, if not the 200,000? The answer is no, right?
We know they don't have
So
that.
then what is the second option? The second option then it would be, let's recruit people, right? Let's bring them from other countries. The current migration system and how everything is done in the country, in Sweden, for example, it's a loop system. So in order for you to get like work, you need to have social number. In order to get a social number, you need to get work. That is why majority of the companies, actually even Spotify tried in many times to bring talent in Sweden. It was almost impossible. So it's a political question as well. So now that is out of the water, right? You have like Peter was here, Eric, was here, and many others that basically even came from United States, and they're still waiting for 2-3 years for the permit and for visa actually to stay. Very capable, very smart people actually. So the second thing is out. So we cannot saturate this as well with importing people to Sweden, let's say, right? So what you're gonna do? And then the third part is that we are talking about citizen data scientists. Right? That means that we are coming to the time where AI is going to be democratized across the organizations. Everybody will supposed to know analytics. Everybody needs to know how data science works. Who's going to do that? The only way how to do that, and yesterday we were talking about the salt and pepper and the central unit, is basically to create capabilities and then basically try to spread out these capabilities and educate as many people in the organization. That is why we were so fascinated when I met you. And when you told about the business model, I was like, shit, that was it.
Yeah, but because what Goran is on to now is that we are now talking about the visible number of 70,000 and 200,000, which is the concrete technical skill sets we need in sort of the tech roles. The not so visible number is the fundamental reskilling to have AI augmented humans. So humans who are working in a domain, in a job that will be done completely different because they have different tools. So you can imagine about ChatGPT, you can imagine about many different things, basically meaning that you're a business controller. We joked about this in Vattenfall, and I said, we're not going to hire a business controller in 2020 who can't do an SQL join. So I'm not talking now about upskilling or reskilling to another cloud engineer.
So repeat, it's like SQL joint. Is that what you
So
said,
basically, one of the simplest things when you start combining data, right? And you're moving maybe in Excel, and then you get more excited because you're moving into pivot tables a little bit more. And now you're getting, and then now actually there's not a flat file anymore, it's a database. And all of a sudden we need to be able to do, business controllers need to be able to manage data in a relational database, in a tabular model. And then we say we do an SQL join. When I say I have a table and cost over here, I need to be able to join it with the power plant over here at the right level of the cost structure. So basically, a very fundamental skill that a typical BI person has, in the most basic one, is to do SQL joins. So basically, now we're talking about...
I was just trying to explain that is not basically how it heard, the joint part, the rest of it.
The joint, you heard the joint, you had fun, but I ignore that joke. I ignore that politically incorrect joke.
Now you got some database talk out of it instead.
And can I have an SQL joint?
That is a T-shirt.
That's a T-shirt. Can you roll an SQL joint? Oh my God.
That's going to be your question for that controller in the interview.
Oh my God. But you see what I mean, right?
Yeah.
So we have a huge dark number where you need to be data literate, or you need to be you need to up your game as a business controller in tech skills.
Yes.
Because you're not going to work in the data you're not going to move data in Excel sheets. You're going to build systems, and you're going to monitor systems, you're going to work with them, and you're going to work. It's like you're not going to be part of the production line of moving data as a business controller. You're going to oversee it.
But I think drawing back before we
so
get
the
back
adult
to
learning then becomes even hugely much more bigger than those 70 or 200,000.
Yeah, and I think before we get back to Anders' question, I mean, people have always been in need to learn new stuff at work.
Yes.
I mean, that's obvious.
Yes.
It's just that the speed of how much new stuff you need to learn is at a different sort of scale today. So that's why we need to talk about it in a more specific way.
Yes, and now let's connect that back to our starting topic, because when you have had an incremental change and the world model of what is the role of a business controller hasn't changed for 50 years, we have incrementally computerized the analog process. Now we're getting into a paradigm shift. How do we define the business controller role? So I'm not even talking about a tech role, but I'm talking about first principles, re-engineer what business controlling is all about and how it's done when it's data AI first. So here now we get to a completely different ball game of change, and therefore a different ball game of reskilling. So it's not just that it goes faster, it's first principle reinventing a role.
It just has the same name.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure I agree also with the comment that we always had to relearn. I mean, if you think about...
Had to learn, not relearn.
Had to learn is different to relearn. Now we need to relearn before we need to learn. That's the difference.
If you think about, 100 years ago and assembly lines kind of production, did you really have to learn or relearn in the same scale you do today?
No, definitely not in the same scale.
But actually,
at some point,
if you back it up even more, we were coming out of an agricultural society, and we had very few people living in the city. We were living at the farm, but we couldn't sustain ourselves. So more and more people were going to work in the factories. And yes, then we had the first level of industrial revolution where we needed to relearn or basically forget about being a farmer and start being a factory worker. That happened. Then we lived in that era, from the early 1900s, where your dad, first of all, your dad was a farmer, so he moved to the factory, and now we are not really relearning. Now we are learning, and we are incrementally learning a bit more on how to work on the assembly line. So that is not relearning, in my opinion.
I simply think that the body of knowledge that you need to have today is significantly larger than it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. But that just adds on to what I was saying, that, even though in any sort of context, and of course there's going to be, examples that doesn't add on to this, but if you just looked at somebody working for the past 50 years in some sort of line of work, there were development in different aspects that needed you to learn new things while you were at work. Even though, if you were advancing things, like if you had worked in a certain role for 10 years, then you would have learned stuff along the way. I can only take like my mother, for example. She worked 40 years at SAS as some sort of secretary. And of course, when she started off, only they did was like paper and pen, and they would, do notes, and then came the telex, or what was it called, and then you had a fax machine, and then you do emails and, whatever. So of course she learned stuff, even
fax
though...
machines, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think...
Okay,
so,
I think
you always had to add on.
Yes, but I still think there is a big difference and a very, very almost exponential increase in the amount of knowledge you need to have to perform work today compared to the past.
Definitely. But you had to use it in a different way as well, which I know that you've discussed previously, like how do we access information that we need? And that's also a difference.
But to me, the big difference here, I gave all that is true, but I think what is really painful is that before we could up the game we knew. So basically, with the level of innovation we have now, there is no point in incrementally improving an efficiency of a business controller setup 10% when there is actually, with technology and data, you can reinvent the process and really restructure the whole process completely and as a transaction cost, lower it by 10 to 1,000x, right? So here we now get into the first principles. Here we go, Elon Musk anyway.
Good.
So Elon Musk highlights and loves the word first principles, and he's doing it on a massive scale, rethinking, re-engineering, how do we land rockets, how can we go to Mars. So he's really rethinking how things has been done for many, many years. And he does it with Tesla, and he does it in manufacturing, and he creates the Giga Press, which is rethinking. And when you have a Giga Press, that factory looks very, very, very different in terms of where you have staff and what they do. I mean, like I just have 200 components. Now the Giga Press is one big component, not 200 things that needs to be welded or joined. So it's completely different. And this is the learning magnitude in our normal jobs that becomes this massive adult learning, relearning exercise of this decade.
And I mean, just to bring it back to, we're going to get back to your question, but
I have it on a list, so no worries.
yeah, good. No, but I think the sort of people that we bring into our programs and then eventually get out and work in these different organizations, they do that on a small scale because they come, and I say that the first 6 months is probably the most important ones in certain aspects because they come fresh perspective. They're not flawed, by the organizational ways of thinking yet. They haven't added that sort of when you go blind when you don't see the woods for the trees. And I think that's that on a small, because they just come in and they be like, why are you doing this? I know, why have you set this up in this sort of manner? Why is this the way that you're solving the problem? And what is the problem that we're trying to solve? They come in with so many good questions and perspective, which is just that.
It's exactly this. And this, I put to you that it would be interesting to follow the trajectory of the people that has gone through such an quite mind-blowing experience. 12 weeks, completely changing careers in 12 weeks. And going in and getting straight down in the deep end in the pool, working for 1 year. Because if you have extended your comfort zone, as we talked about in this way, that's a gift for that person for the rest of their career in terms of relearning and adaptability.
Knowing how to push it.
Which I think in sense can become a very, very... The ability to learn and relearn is the power skill over all power skills.
And that's the actual skills gap that we're trying to solve. It's not just the specific problem that the organization is having in this particular time. It's about going forward. What kind of people do you want to bring on for you to be able to know that you're going to meet whatever kind of needs there are in the future,
and who has an experience that changed their minds in terms of comfort
because
zone.
they know they can do it. Yes,
they have done it, and this is the first time you do it. It's always super scary, but when you have done it once, you know you can do it again, and that power, that strength, will be very interesting to see what happens
because
when they do their new career.
Exactly, because they're going to be the first one, and I've seen this firsthand, so I know this is not just corporate bullshit lies. Whenever these team faces like, oh, we need to add this thing on, we need to learn this sort of system, or we're going to add these things features, they're always first in line to be like, I can do it,
because they know they have done it before. What a power!
It's just like taking the first step towards things.
But because I think now this tells us something also about the education system and what we need, regardless if it's academia or it's to teach the ability to learn and give people the comfort zone to tackle new learning, which is slightly different than you need to know this and then you can be certified as a doctor. You need to know. No. This is a different ball game, which I think these 12 weeks encapsulates as a mind-blowing experience if you take it in the right way.
Louise.
Yes.
What's the future of schools and universities?
Well, I think we're still going to be in need of schools and universities. Maybe not in the same way that they have been traditionally, because of course, as you know, the school system in itself is slow. So even though in your field of work, data scientists or people working within this field, even though they come out of university, they're still like X amount of years behind, and they don't get enough practice, so they're not really ready to go out and do stuff. I still think, I love higher degrees because what you learn when you go through university or such is how to learn, how to cope with a lot of new information. And that's always going to be high value.
I would say as well.
Yeah, exactly. But that's always going to be high value and really, really important. So, I mean, I'm not saying that we should throw away higher education. I think that serves a very, very important goal, or what's the word? Purpose. Thank you. But I think in order to find certain kind of skill sets, yes, we need to add on ways of learning and how to structure the way to take somebody from point A to point B. And of course, our way of doing it is not for everyone. I always say that it's not for everyone to go through these kind of very, very intense learning programs of 12 weeks and then actually going into the proper jungle, which is reality. But for certain kind of people, this is the best way to go into it. So we need to find different ways.
Yes. I think you have an awesome way, and I think, more people should go through it in that way. Then the question comes, why shouldn't that be part of a normal educational system
as well?
Why does it have to go through a startup?
Good question. I think that if we were talking about the regular school system, you wouldn't be able to have that sort of qualification system that we do. That's the first thing.
Why not?
Well, of course, if you would... good question, and I may be reverting my answer there straight away. No, but I'm thinking if, for instance, if you're applying to become a doctor, you need the highest degrees of different things. But those sort of degrees is not the equivalent of what we're looking for. So I
Today,
think,
at least,
yeah, exactly.
It could change.
Exactly. If we're talking about change, then of course, I think on a... Now I'm, talking freely here, but I think that we should probably change.
I'm trying to stress you a bit here.
Yeah, that's good. I'll take a deep breath. No, but probably the time we put into our higher education probably needs to be compromised in some sort of way. I've heard numbers that if you go through the regular sort of, being a data engineer through like KTH, the equivalent of time that you actually practice proper coding or doing hands-on work is going to be equivalent to the actual practice and doing proper training that you do during our 12 weeks.
So in one way, you're doing a lot of more deeper theory, doing all these things, but the hands-on practical stuff that you will need day one, it's not so much less.
No, it's the same.
But because then of course KTH would argue, yes, you need the coding, we give you the 12 weeks, but you need all these other things as well.
And of course the coding part on, if you would do one of the programs on KTH, they would prepare you for any kind of context, sort of.
Yeah.
Well, we only prepare you for a specific context within this client's tech stack or whatever. So we do a very specific training for a specific output, while the higher education system prepares you for a more general setting.
And then, of course, our systems today, we have a middle ground. We have yrkeshögskolor.
Exactly.
Actually, Katarina, my sambo, she's going to yrkeshögskola in UX design right now. So that's very much somewhere in between. It's not as intensive what you're describing, but it's literally how to, what are the skill sets we need to have, both theoretical methods and sort of coding, Figma or whatever it is.
I want to do a UX program for, I think that would be really interesting.
I think a UX program would probably a front-end developer would fit quite well into that storytelling. But it's interesting, right? So yrkeshögskola, what's the difference? We have some of these sort of more applicable operational type educations as well.
But I would argue a little bit that this program, this is actually also answer to Anders' thing, which is saying like why school cannot take this. There's a question: can you train a doctor in 12 weeks?
No.
No. Can you train a mathematician or a physician in 12 weeks?
I would say partly.
Partly, right? And so we can find like a number of...
For a specific area of expertise.
I will argue that maybe it's okay, fine. If you can probably take like a part of engineering, let's say I'm a chemical engineer, so you can take like a part of the engineering and say like, okay, you're gonna do this process, and they're gonna be excellent with that. But if they need to start innovating, for example, and understanding the basic why, for example, this stone, when you dissolve it and you make it actually in these different materials, are acting in a different way, then you have like. So I believe that it's not applicable to everything. Maybe USDX, maybe.
I mean,
data
the
side.
more theoretical parts.
Right.
It's
Practical, I would say.
Yeah, exactly.
All the things that are practical, you can.
Yeah.
But something that needs a little bit more knowledge, skills, and learning behind it, I would argue that maybe it's not possible in 12 weeks.
But
we teach salespeople in 4 days to
but
be on the phone.
if I but let's take the example with the doctors, right? So maybe you need the baseline going through school and doing your training like in education today. But what clearly needs to happen, how is continuous learning done from doctors today? Because of course there are practices or techniques, new techniques. You have tittle chirurgy that didn't exist before. Now you need to know that, and so there's a lot of on-the-job training and development going on in all different fields, of course.
Yeah. But I would add to, and I wanna throw the question back at you, like what you think about schools today. But what I think one of the main differences between what we do and what regular schools do is that since we only have such a short amount of time to work with, we need to be very smart about how we use that time. Yeah. And that is not the same when you go through the more traditional school, because then you have lots of time. And when we put up the methods for how to learn something in 12 weeks, we have to be very adamant about what it is that we actually do, and even more specific about how we do it. And then you have to go back to how the brain functions. How do we actually learn things? And then you need to put up the methods that we use accordingly to that, because we have to work with how the brain works. And then it becomes interesting for real. And then you cannot have like 4-hour-long lectures that's, very romantic in that sort of way, but it doesn't really feed you that kind of, proper knowledge that you can put to use.
But then you can argue, why can't we...
Please argue.
But no, the education system is needed, and we need education, that are longer or more deeper and more theoretical and all this. But couldn't we demand them to be more efficient?
Yeah.
Couldn't we demand them to sharpen up their
be more practical?
Not only practical, but latching on to what Louise said, we're having things how we do things. Going to lectures that are too long or whatever, too boring, or 1,000 people in a room. That is simply not. We all know the research is done. It doesn't work. It's not efficient anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
And okay, then
it doesn't work accordingly with how the brain works.
And then you come to the next problem. Then what's the cost per individual? I mean, there's some. So if the ideal way to do it would be probably too costly to do all, the way you are doing it, and the cost of intensity, But there is something here that, of course, could be improved.
Yeah. But back to you, Anders. What's your take on the question?
We need change. That's a good phrasing. No, but there have been a number of initiatives, and if we take AI specifically, there's been a number of governmental approaches to try to do more lifelong learning kind of approaches for that. It was one called AI Competence for Sweden, I think one initiative was. So actually they tried to force universities, they gave specific funding for universities to do something which is more lifelong learning kind of approach, which I think is really good. But they're trying to change universities, and universities is one of the most traditional institutions that we have in our society. Yeah. Lund University or Uppsala University, I'm not sure who is the eldest one, but one of them is, and it's like 500 plus years.
There would be some of the oldest companies in the world.
Yeah.
Isn't it Uppsala? I think it is.
Yeah, probably Uppsala. But they haven't really changed that much. And in 500 years, if there is something that is in need of change, and you're an expert on this, Louise, it would be universities, I think. they have changed partly, but not that much, to be frank. And I think it's something that needs to be not evolved, but rather revolved. You know, not evolution, but revolution.
Rethought. But what? How?
Yeah.
You know, what does it entail? Really difficult question, of course.
And we are seeing, you know, of course, today so many courses coming online, and you can do a lot of them for free. They're really good.
Yeah.
They're
There's
really
so
short.
many good stuff out there.
Yeah, they're really short. And if we I also have a concern for universities that, you know, it's not supposed to do only education, but also research. And we're also seeing that type of work being moved away from universities. So then if they can't do education nor research, what's really the future of academia? That's really concerning to me, because I love academia. And
I do too.
And we need it.
Yes. So I certainly don't have the answer for it. I know a lot of stuff has been tried. I know a lot of stuff has been failing. I think what you're doing is great. I think, you know, this is probably the best way to do it, to show by example, to show that if we do it in this way, and we can make it as a startup, and companies love it, and we can make a big change in our society, that I think is the best way to make change. And you also make some money for doing it. So that's
of course. It's not for charity.
And sometimes it becomes something that needs to be the catalyst to show the way. And then basically, well, if that is done, how can we incorporate that in our curricula? How can we have different pace learning or whatever? Because we don't even have this thing like different pace learning.
No, but I think one of the interesting part that I'm seeing a lot of time is how hard it is to shift the mindset of people about the worth of doing the kind of things that we're doing and what the results are compared to the more traditional things. Because, I mean, that's the first question, like, how does this compare to somebody who has actually done, you know, the proper way of learning how to be an engineer of some sort? I mean, it's such a hard nut to crack. And I mean, the best way to do it is to actually, you know, to get that sort of person who hurts the most to do a pilot and to see like, oh, it works. And it works really well. But I mean, that whole mindset of somebody who has gone through that very, very traditional way of learning is the better candidate. I don't, you know, there's still companies out there, modern companies today, who doesn't hire people who doesn't have a, you know, a certain degree of things.
It's so even going even more in that direction to some degree.
I feel it's a bit sad sometimes. I remember, you know, a math professor I loved that I had, and I asked him a question because I was forced to take. He was like a professor in differential geometry, and I didn't get it at that time. It is not my favorite thing in math, even though I love math. But still, I said, you know, what the do I need to learn this for?
Function.
What the fuss?
And he actually, you know, said, I agree with you. But the thing with forcing students to go through this course is not that they will have use for it. It's to show that they can learn it. And I said, is that really the purpose? You force some people to do something just to show that they can rather than have use for it. Why not then have courses that actually show that they can do something but also have use for it? Why not teach something else? I thought it was a really sad statement, even though I agree with him that actually is what a lot of courses today in universities is about.
Yeah. And so I mean, that's one of the key things that talking about, you know, efficient ways of learning, it's about stating the goal or the purpose of why are you learning this thing. And we usually break it down to not only saying like at the end of this 12 weeks program, you're going to be able to do these things, but you break it down almost to the point where you talk about each day. When you are done today, you need to have grasped the concept of these things. You need to learn how to, you know, perform these kind of actions, because then everybody who's in this sort of, or in this program or in the classroom, when the day is done, they'll know, can I do this? Can I do this? Have I, you know, did I bring what I needed from today? And if not, then I know that I have work to do when I come home. And if I do, I'll go, you know, I'll take on the next day.
Should we have at least one more question, a more AI-related one as well?
Last one. I think we're
Yes.
on reload.
Because I have another question before the questions.
Before?
So you remember what we said
We're going to take a
yesterday?
record. We're going to take a record.
Yeah. So remember what we said yesterday? Yesterday we had a planning for the
really?
season 6, right?
And here I am.
Yeah, it was terrible planning. We always do these plannings like every year we meet. It's like this is what we're gonna do. 5 minutes, then we go for a beer, and that's it. Forgot about everything. But we said like no more beyond 2 hours. 2 hours 40 minutes.
Oh no!
Yes.
I thought it was going to be a short one.
Yeah, exactly. It is a short one. It's becoming a short one.
It's insane. We need to be better at this.
But anyway, okay. So, I mean, even for teaching in 12 weeks some kind of technical skills in how to write an integration program for Azure, moving from Postgres to their SQL database that they have, or whatnot.
SQL joint, that was the right
Joint, yeah, we have to have that on a t-shirt or something. Still, there are AI tools coming up, ChatGPT, of course, but so many others as well. I just want to add that, you know, I think ChatGPT is impressive, but still incremental in terms of research, but really impressive in terms of engineering. Then I end with that. But still, it shows that you can simply ask a computer saying, how do I write a piece of code to do a sorting algorithm for this, or do an integration from Salesforce into their Synapse database in Azure or whatnot. And they write it. And it works surprisingly well.
Yes.
And if this is, you know, just the current state, and you extrapolate and imagine that this will be an exponential increase in the ability.
Stick.
The hockey stick.
The only sport reference I can actually use.
How do you see, you know, programming or tech education happening in the future if we can start simply, you know, interact with computers speaking in natural language like we do today? Do you think it will be a radical change in what type of skills people will need to have?
Radical change in skills. Well, I think that there's always the joint. Now we're talking about it again. But
we will always never say join again. We'll always say, I want to join.
Between knowing what kind of problem it is that you're trying to solve. And I would argue that most of the technical innovations are just, you know, problem solving. You find the means to get what you're actually aiming for.
It's not about coding per se. It's really about, you know, resolving the logical challenge.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's good. I hope it's true. I'm not sure, but I think, you know, if we think about the calculator and math classes in the past, or for 30 years ago, you know, you were not allowed to use a calculator, and it was like you have to teach yourself in the steps in just performing calculations in different ways. They moved away from that, and I think that's good. And basically, you start using tools more and more, and tools becomes integral in how you also do, you know, work, but also in education. And perhaps AI will be like a tool that you also apply in both education and work. Do you think that will happen, or?
Yeah, of course. I think all the good tools that we bring together or forward is going to be used in those examples that you just said. But I mean, I'm not the expert here. That's you guys. So you should be the one who says how that's going to be working. But I think I always like to think about everything that's happening and evolving, and how we perceive things, and how we use different kind of tool sets in order to make sense of things. We're going to be using that. And I find the topic of AI on a broad scale as very interesting at this point of time, because even though it has been around for quite some time, especially if you look at, you know, the long history of it, but in the more usable way that we are using it today, I mean, it's so early on. And I find it funny when people are talking about nowadays the more visible aspects of AI, because now I feel at least like we are at the point where people understands, within quotation marks, that it's here and we can solve a lot of things about it, and it's usable, and it's not just for like the technical geniuses who can use it. It's for everyday people. And when people realize that it's a tool set that you can use for a bunch of different things, then, you know, nature and how we evolve thing is going to have its way with it. Yeah. So the good usages, or the way where it actually provides value of some sorts, that's going to be, you know, sorted out. And all the crap stuff that we use for it is going to be, you know, parts of history, the ones that we forgot.
Very optimistic view of the future, and I certainly share it. So
but I like that ending, that to some degree will sort itself out. What is useful will be used, and what is crap will pass into history.
I hope so.
And I think we should round it off on that. and with that, I'm gonna ask the two favorite final questions. Did you have one question?
Yes.
I was trying to shoot you down when you were away. I was trying to end it.
Just try we're doing like a 5 to 7 minutes. So Louise is a fellow podcaster as well. So she has a pod which is called the Upskill.
That's
pod.
right.
And I've been listening to that.
Thank you.
Now we are on 7, 8.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. And it's in Swedish, together with one of your colleagues.
Yeah, Emma.
So so it's not actually a question, a little bit more like a discussion regarding like you're doing podcasts. How do you experience this?
But I really like this. I have to say, I told you I was really nervous coming here. I was like, what am I going to bring to this? But it was. I mean, I love a good conversation, and I usually don't like, you know, talking about stuff in public is not my thing. I've spent my whole professional life being in the shadows, making sure that everybody else has what they need. And now I find myself being like the mascot of the things that we do. So I'm out talking all the time. But this sort of free format and just discussing things, it's wonderful. You have a good thing going.
Jumping into
a bit
rabbit
long,
holes.
maybe, or is it okay? Maybe we cut it down in snippets and all that, but 3 hours. But it goes fast, doesn't it?
Yeah, extremely fast.
It's really crazy. we need to stick to the 2 hours.
Yes.
Yeah, you should.
Yes.
But it's a little bit like Marvel. They started 2 hours, now it's 3 hours. You know, it's a good Marvel movie now has to be 3 hours.
What are the actual two final questions then?
What's next in your life? What's happening privately, professionally? You know, what are you looking forward to in the next around the corner?
Well, if I start off privately, as I said, I think earlier, my life revolves heavily around books. I'm constantly reading, and I love to explore new things. And you know, it could be whatever. I read about art, or I read about physics, or and now I'm into this. I'm deep diving into the topic of split brain.
Split brain?
Split brain. What is
I
this?
love this.
Now we have to stay another.
What?
This is for the after work. No, but you know, working with learning, I try to read up on, you know, how we work accordance with how the brain works, and then for some reason I started reading up on split brain patients. So when they actually, you know, they sever the connection between the right and the left hemisphere of the brain. Love it, because it just brings out so many aspects of how we talked about, you know, the consciousness, or how we perceive things, and when you start messing around with the brain and you shut things off, you know, strange stuff happens. So I'm really into that one right now.
Brain is amazing.
Yeah, I know. But we'll talk about this afterwards.
Yes.
That's fine.
Split brain is for the afterwards.
So great, like now we got like joints, now it's mushrooms involved in all of this. I don't know what this is going.
Now, you bring this up, and then final question: do you have any recommendations for guests that you would love to listen to in this format?
Yeah, I have actually. I think I mentioned it to you earlier, but a couple of years ago there was a book that came out from a Swedish philosopher. Her name is Jonna Bornemark. And the name of the book in Swedish is Det omätbaras renässans, which would translate into the renaissance of the unmeasurable. Sounds very nice.
Pretty good in English, actually. That was the book title for Amazon right there.
And what she does is, exactly. And The book is about our obsession with measuring things and where that leads to the stuff that we cannot measure and how we perceive the world regarding this. And I must say that it's not an easy read. I've done my fair share of philosophy studies as well as reading, but this one, I had to take breaks sometimes and just be like, okay, now I need to read this page again.
And play some cards in between.
Yeah, I just need to, this has to just put somewhere in the back of my head. It's not an easy read, but it's an extremely interesting one. And I would love to hear her because she sort of handles the, how we put up our society and how we measure things and where that leads us in thinking. And then she sort of draws back to very, old philosophers. We're talking like 1600s. Super interesting. And I would love to hear her in the context of these things.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
That's my aim.
Cool. All right. So, Louise, thank you very much for joining us for this 2 hour plus. Let's call it that. And
almost 3 hours. But
no, 2 hour plus.
Okay.
And so interesting, so fun, and such an important topic, and it's such a relevant topic in the context of data and AI.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really, really fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.